Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talking Pictures. I'm your host, Tim Rosenberger, and today we're going to be talking about the Best Picture Oscar nominees for this year. There are 8, as opposed to last year when there were 9. And to talk about those 8 films is returning guest who did the past 2 Oscar podcasts, my friend Blake. Blake, thanks for coming back on.
Oh, absolute pleasure. I think this is our third year doing this, third year. It's got to be
Yes,
our third year.
yeah, it's our
But
third year, yep.
yeah, no, this is always fun. I mean, I see all these movies anyway, so I figured, I want to sit down and talk about them with somebody. And when it comes to you and I talking through these nominees, we don't really put a limit on it. Whenever I talk about movies on the radio, there's always strict time segments you have to stick to. But here, I feel like we get a real open-ended discussion. And it always ends up being a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting mix of films this year. Similar to last year, we have, I think, all but, let's see, I think all but 2 films are period films. 5 of the films are based off of true events, even though some of them are very loosely based off of true events. And if you even count Roma, that is kind of based off true events as well, but we can get into that when we eventually talk about that one. Also, 2 of these films either about or feature prominently African American casts. One features very prominently women as its main characters. Another features a bisexual man as the main character. Another features, I think, entirely Mexicans as their main characters. So there's a lot of variety. It's not just where sometimes, a lot of times in previous years, it might just be kind of whitewashed and just all straight white people. So it's kind of gone diverse this year with that. Were you surprised to see that in this year's nominees, that kind of wide ranging of different things?
Not entirely, and part of it has to do with some conversations I took part in last year around April. Every year I try to go to Roger Ebert's film festival in Champaign-Urbana here in Illinois. And the person that I was hosting, because I volunteer just to kind of be a driver or, make sure people get to and from hotels and events safely. The person I was hosting was Gregory Nava. And for listeners who are familiar, you know Gregory Nava as the director of Selena, the movie that starred Jennifer Lopez and really catapulted her career to superstardom. Nava is a governor in the Academy. He has been a part of the Academy for, I believe, almost 3 decades now. He was very outspoken about how things were going to be changing going into 2019. So I always tried to keep, the little tidbits and things that he was saying. Now, he wasn't being very specific. He wasn't talking about specific films. He did talk about films he enjoyed. There were several of the films that are nominated didn't even come out or have any release at all until the end of the year in 2018. But I know that he and his fellow governors, based off of what he was telling me, was very clear in saying, look, a lot of what people are criticizing the Academy for over the last 5 years is going to change. It is going to change, and we're hopefully going to make changes swiftly and quickly, and you'll see some of these in 2019, and then you'll see a few more develop over the next, I think, 3 to 4 years. I mean, and we've heard, some talk here and there of something like a most popular film, award, which I got to be honest, I'm not really in favor of. I think we have plenty of other award and accolades and other things.
It's very pandering.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily needed, but I will say that I think it kind of went without saying for me that I think Black Panther would have probably swept that if they forced that award into the program this year.
And they're still talking. They still might do it.
They might do it. Yeah.
Hopefully they don't, but
I think they found out that the interest to have such things, these types of categories developing, weren't exactly necessary. However, I will say I was glad to see something like Black Panther. I very much enjoyed that film. I'm looking forward to talking about it with you. End up in this list of 8 nominees this year. So your initial question, was I surprised? Not really. But then again, it's only because I was part of, I wouldn't call it privileged conversation, but I just happened to be in this particular place at this particular time hearing about how the Academy is cognizant of its criticisms and they're going to do everything they can to change it over time. And I think they've done a pretty good job of getting a solid list of directors, films, the actors specifically in many cases. Of course, stuff's going to get left out, but I think they've done a pretty good job of making a shift from what they were so easily being criticized for over the last 5 or 6 years. And I would say quite a few of those criticisms were rightfully so.
Yeah, and they have notably, I think they're getting better since the whole Oscar so white thing happened. I think they're very quickly changing their tune a bit and fixing those problems. Obviously, it's still going to take a while, but I think we're getting on the right track with it. Just real quick, before we actually get into the actual nominees, there were a couple films, and trying to remember what one of them was, but there was a couple films I think were surprisingly left out, at least to me, of the nominees. One was the Ryan Gosling film First Man.
Damien Chazelle's film.
Yeah, Damien
Yes.
Chazelle. I was trying to remember
Yeah.
his name. That was left out after I have not been able to see that film, unfortunately, but I heard nothing but rave stuff about it, so I was surprised somewhat that that one was left out. And then what was? Oh God, there was another one. It was the guy who did Moonlight. The
Oh, Barry Jenkins. If
yeah,
Beale Street Could Talk. Yeah.
yeah. That people were kind of that has been nominated for at least I know at least one award, maybe two, but it did not get nominated for Best Picture, even though I was hearing some good things about that as well, and some possibilities of that getting nominated. Were you sad that those were left out? I don't know if you got to see the latter film.
Well, I definitely saw First Man. I have yet to see If Beale Street Could Talk. I'm a big Barry Jenkins fan, so
Hmm.
for me, that had to do a lot with access to seeing the film based on where I live. It did play here very briefly, and I missed it entirely. So I'm hoping to correct that before the Oscars broadcast, because it is nominated for Best Supporting Actress and I believe
Does it have a
Adapted
song?
Screenplay. Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, I mean, yeah, it was not lacking in recognition from the Academy, but it did not end up in Best Picture, which for a category that could be up to 10, sometimes I wonder why they didn't just go to 10. For example, the two films you mentioned, I could have easily seen them as, a match for some of the films that are listed. There's one film that while I did enjoy it, I think it's a bit overrated for this particular category. We'll get to that eventually, obviously. But yeah, I very much enjoyed First Man. I thought the performances were great. I thought the direction was good. I thought that the way they presented sound in the film was quite excellent because for the most part, it's a drama. It's a
Yeah.
film that is just happening, like family drama, things like that, and then it goes into space. But it does so in, it's a true story, so or based
Hmm.
on a true story. So it's a very realistic approach to how they did it. And then the way they handled space was just, I don't know. I was sitting in that theater and I was really taking it in, and I thought that was excellent filmmaking to really transport
Hmm.
me and make me feel like I'm part of the scene.
Hmm.
And the cinematography in the film was also excellent. I'm a
Uh,
little surprised that it didn't get a nod. However, the nominees in that category are excellent this year. So, look, I think it goes without saying 2018 was a good year for film. And the Academy's not going to be able to pay attention to everything, clearly, with the amount of members they have, with the politics and the rules that a film has to follow to even be considered can be quite extensive for some of the films that don't
hmm.
have, studio backing or things like that. So it is good to see, though, that I think they've done a good job of spreading nominations across a wide variety of films. When you look at the bigger picture, not just this one category, but we're really only going to cover one category because there's still 8 films to talk about.
Yeah, you can't please everybody. There's always going to be something left out. Okay, so our first film is Black Panther. It is one of the few superhero films to be nominated for Best Picture. The other one I'm thinking of, I know Dark Knight was for 2008. I can't remember. I don't know if any other one was nominated to my knowledge. I don't think there was. Might be forgetting something. But this is one of the many Marvel Cinematic Universe films. For people who don't know, they're just interlocking films that take place in the same universe. So, like Incredible Hulk, Captain America, Thor, now Black Panther, those all take place in the same universe, and there are crossovers and such. This film is mostly pretty standalone. I don't think there's anything you really have to see from the other films to really appreciate this one. Any references to those other films, they explain what you need to know, so you kind of are up to speed with those. And what this follows is there is a fictional country in Africa called Wakanda that is led by King T'Challa, played by Chadwick Boseman, which has futuristic technology way beyond the rest of the world. And the country of Wakanda, over many decades, has kept this technology secret by a force field that's around the main city that basically puts some sort of like a holographic image or something that basically if people go to Wakanda or if there are satellite images of it or whatever, only thing people are seeing is basically people walking around a very primitive village with mud and like primitive shacks and stuff. So as far as anybody else knows, this is just a very kind of primitive society. There's not much of any interest there. But there are some people who do know about the secrets of Wakanda. One is a kind of a, I don't know how you describe him. I don't know if you would say arms dealer. Basically a very dangerous person who has a history with Wakanda, played by Andy Serkis, who's trying to get a rare kind of element from Wakanda called
Vibranium.
And he's trying to get that because you can use that for various different purposes, and they've used basically Wakanda's used that to develop all their very futuristic technology. So he's trying to get back into Wakanda so he can get as much of that as possible. And meanwhile, he's joined up with a guy named Eric Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan, who has his own ties to Wakanda and is looking through a very old secret that he has held onto, is looking to take over the throne from T'Challa and basically use the technology of Wakanda against the rest of the world, who he thinks should be basically under the foot of Wakanda. And to defend his country, T'Challa uses his Black Panther powers, which is something that's passed on from each king, and he has a high-tech suit along with his heightened strength. And helping him out is a American government agent, I believe, played by Martin Freeman, T'Challa's very smart sister, his basically head of the, I guess you would say, armed forces or whatever, and his kind of romantic love interest, confidant person, played by Lupita Nyong'o. So a lot of people were thinking this was going to get nominated from pretty much, I think when it came out, it was a favorite to be nominated. It really, I mean, these Marvel movies have been coming out, let's see, at this point, this came out in 2018, so the Marvel movies have been coming out for 10 years at this point, or about 10 years. At that point, they're kind of almost old hat, but this one, when it came out, because it features, I mean, I think really the only prominent white actors in it are Martin Freeman and Andy Serkis, and so it's almost entirely led by African American actors. And it really took audiences by storm, really, and people just latched onto it and were just raving about it. It got great reviews, and it was just almost, kind of a mini, I mean, it's not on the level of something like a Star Wars or something, but it did cause its own little sensation. So it's not terribly surprising. It was eventually nominated for this, and I'm glad it was nominated for this and not the stupid popular film thing, which is, again, I think just insulting. But so yeah, it wasn't terribly surprising this was nominated. It was also directed, I believe, by an African American director, right?
Mhm.
Yes, and he also co-wrote the script for the film. And ultimately, I will say I enjoyed the film. One thing I think that it really has going for it, that I think Ryan Coogler brought to it, and that Marvel, I think, thankfully let him do, was he really brought his own kind of taste and feel to the film. Because one of the criticisms of Marvel movies has been, and I agree to a certain extent, is that they all kind of have the same type of feel to them. They don't often let the directors make them their own films, which is maybe one reason why some of the directors have been let go over the years. But this one, I think it was almost, I wonder if it's a change for Marvel, because it really does feel not radically different, but it does feel different from the other films. And I'm very pleased with that, especially since it is delving into a different culture, a fictional culture, but a different culture. And it really gives you the taste of that place. Out of the Marvel movies that have come out, a lot of them have not always had the best villains. They've been kind of very cookie cutter, very one dimensional, and not very good. But Michael B. Jordan, I think, partially because of him and partially because of the writing, I think have given the Marvel Universe probably the most three-dimensional and complex antagonist they've done up to this point. I will say I haven't seen this film since it came out, so I'm a bit fuzzy on some of the details, but I think a lot of that did go to Michael B. Jordan and just what he was doing. He brought so much to that with doing not really, I mean, it's not a subtle performance necessarily, or a subtle part, but he brings so much to it that's little and just adds so much to it without doing very much, that I really have to commend him for this film. I will admit I like the film. I wouldn't say I love the film. I think it does suffer from being a teeny bit too slow. Not very slow, but just individual scenes and the movie as a whole, just the pace was a little bit too slow for me, and that kind of hurt it overall for me.
We share a lot of the same thoughts in terms of how great Michael B. Jordan's performance
Hmm.
was. I think Ryan Coogler, who's the director on this, who has worked with Jordan before, previously on Creed and Fruitvale Station.
Did he do Creed 2?
He did not do Creed 2. I believe he helped produce it. But
Okay.
he did Creed 1. And the thing with the villain in this particular film is we had a great introduction to T'Challa and sort of a brief, not full look behind the curtain at what
Hmm.
Wakanda was capable of, but we got a general understanding in Captain America Civil War. And I remember being in the theater, and it was pretty packed because I saw
Hmm.
this 3 times in theaters. I saw it once on my own and then twice with friends, family. And each time it had good sized audiences, which I think says a lot for a Marvel film to be, 2-3 weeks into release and still pulling in crowds. The other thing was that first time everybody they flew into Wakanda, I remember hearing quite a cheer, quite a roar from the crowd. So, hey, I can have my own opinions about certain things films do well, certain things films don't do well. However, sometimes the crowd speaks, and the crowd tells me what works and what doesn't. Maybe I'm wrong is another way to say it. I think Black Panther sort of hit all the right beats in terms of being a film that, while a part of a bigger universe, woven into the fabric of this 20 film comic book universe that we've become so accustomed to seeing, 2 to 3 releases a year out of. This movie can stand on its own from beginning to end. It doesn't rely on a lot of characters we've seen before. It doesn't rely on having to be rescued, by throwing in a Thor or a Captain America or anybody like that. It straight up from beginning to end tells its own story with excellent characters, great performances, by the way. In fact, I'd probably say this is some of the best acting in any of the Marvel films by an ensemble. I don't know about individual people, but the ensemble was very strong.
I mean, because they also have, besides Chadwick Boseman, Lupita Nyong'o, Mike B. Jordan, they also have Forrest Whitaker, they have Angela Bassett,
and Denai Guerrera and Letitia Wright, who I think was a breakout star in this movie as Shuri, T'Challa's sister, who's like the head of tech and is, just hyper genius is the only way to describe her. She's such a great character, and there's so much charm, I think, that, like you mentioned earlier, not always does the Disney machine allow a director to really take control over their production. I felt from start to finish I was watching a Ryan Coogler film that happened to be a comic book film, and I appreciated that. So letting it be its own thing made this film work, I think, a lot more for me than almost any other Marvel film I've seen. And trust me, I've enjoyed quite a few of them. That's not to say they've been bad. I walked out of this one thinking, man, if this is a way we're going to keep making these films or getting to see these films, I should say, because I'm not making them, but keep getting a chance to see these films, but also be entertained and shown something new, even at, like, I think this was like the 18th or 19th Marvel film to be released. That gives me hope that they're not done telling good stories. I do think that Killmonger is probably the finest villain in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think in one movie he gave us everything we wanted in a multi-layered, sympathetic character who also was a man of action. He was very visceral. The way he handled things was so unnerving at times.
Yeah, and I think my wife particularly felt this way, and in certain instances you almost you understand where he's coming from, and you almost agree with his point of view, as dangerous as it is. Even if you ultimately don't agree that he's approaching it the right way, you understand where he's coming from, and you disagree with his methods, but what he is fighting for, honorable to a certain degree. He's just been so, I think, perverted and filled with anger over time that he's just kind of lost the right way, the better way to approach it. There are other Marvel antagonists who have also been very well developed, but those were in TV shows where they had 13 episodes or whatever to develop them. So the fact that they were able to do this, and really, Michael B. Jordan doesn't even have the whole 2 hours because there are other characters to deal with. So the fact that they were able to do this, I think, is a good sign, because in other movies, particularly I think like Thor Ragnarok, they would have great actors given almost nothing to work with, and it would be really a waste of a lot of talent. So I'm hoping that they have taken heart from this. In some of the films that came after this, I think they did, and learned to give the audience a more developed villain in a short span of time, because I think it's much more rewarding that way.
I would agree. And I think that this is certainly one of those films that, again, it's a blockbuster. It's a big tentpole, $200 million, part of a bigger, universe of films, franchise type situation that we're going to get sequels of. And trust me, I'm excited for those. But at the same time, it's not typically what the Academy recognizes in the line of Best Picture. And not to step ahead or step on you and correct you, but Dark Knight wasn't nominated for Best Picture. It was nominated for other awards, but this is the first film to be nominated for Best Picture and be a superhero film.
One second, I might have to just
feel free to look that up, but I had to check on it too, because there was an article I read the other day how this was the first superhero film nominated for Best Picture. Dark Knight received like 7 nominations, I think, and Best Picture was not one of them.
Oh,
which is so
damn.
bizarre if you think
Yeah.
about it, because it was one of the best pictures to be
Okay.
made that year.
I think I partially get confused because basically every other Christopher Nolan movie for the past few years has been nominated for Best Picture. So
Right. Right.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's and I think that if anything, the way we've been talking about Black Panther, I think it says something that of all the films in this category, this one's breaking down barriers for the classification of film that it is, which is a superhero film. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
going to give me a film that has great acting, superb writing, great direction, etc., and the backdrop, the way that I'm viewing it is under the lens of a
Mhm.
superhero film, what does that matter? As
Mhm.
long as it's one of the best films of the year, I think it should be recognized. And this one was. So I'm happy about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and it should be noted that this isn't the first. It's the first time a superhero movie has been nominated, it turns out, but it's not the first time a film kind of like this has been nominated. I would, draw attention to Raiders of the Lost Ark was nominated for Best Picture back in
Right.
81. And I think it should be noted that, a movie doesn't have to be. Not that I don't think there's anything deeper in this, just some stuff that this movie does say about society and people and politics
Social
and
commentary,
there's
strong social commentary.
yes, there
Yeah.
is there's social commentary in this, but it's primarily a whammo blammo action adventure film. But that's okay. A movie doesn't have to. Again, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That film, as far as I can think, says absolutely nothing about society or anything except maybe Nazis are bad. But that is a really solid film that deserved that nomination. And it's not really about whether, a film doesn't have to be, in order to be nominated, it doesn't have to be really say anything at all. It just has to be a very good film in whatever genre that it is. So in the case of Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's a really good action adventure film. My favorite Best Picture winners was It Happened One Night with Clark Gable and Claudia Colbert, which again says absolutely really nothing about anything, but is a really, really solid romantic comedy film. So for anybody who might be thinking that, Black Panther might not be important enough, to use air quotes, for, a Best Picture nomination, I would say, it's not what the Best Picture is about. It's just being a really good film that's, again, whatever thing it's trying to succeed in. Black Panther isn't trying to do too much that's terribly deep. It's just trying to mostly be fun. So, I mean, I think it mostly succeeds in that.
Knowing that the Academy is wanting to make some adjustments, some changes, and not simply be kind of paint by numbers. You're probably
Mm-hmm.
going to hear me say that phrase quite a bit this year, or in this podcast. It's been my phrase this year when I'm watching films, when I want to pick something apart, because it's always something I've seen before. Black Panther is like, I think, number 19 out of 20 total films in a greater universe, and that is really its primary goal. It's to help establish new characters, build upon, and push this big overarching thing forward. It checked every box within itself as what it needed to do to be a success.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I think that this film, and I'm happy that it's nominated in this Best Picture category, amongst others. I think it's got 7 nominations. But to have been nominated in this particular category, be the first of its ilk in that superhero archetype of film, I think it says a lot for the filmmaking. I think it says a lot for the acting, the directing, the writing, everything about it. And I don't disagree at all. You even said it earlier. You're like, this is a film that a lot of people thought was going to get nominated from very early on in the year of 2018. I at no point would have disagreed with that. If it came down to, 8 nominees and this was the one that was getting edged out, I think it would have been a wise choice to make this the 9th nominee. I don't care if it doesn't have a chance at winning. I think it says something that this particular film was so good, and it was. It was so good that it deserves to be in the company of films that are nominated in this particular category. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very good thing going forward when it comes to action adventure films, superhero films. I don't like the idea that the only way I can get a movie into that category is to make something, superbly about social justice or a drama that is just so, heart-wrenching and for a vast majority of audience members hard to watch. Yeah, I mean that too.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to a movie like Amour, there's an example of a film that I think is a beautiful, heart-wrenching film, right? I am not in any way going to invite 6 people over to sit, pop popcorn, and watch Amour. I'm going to do that for Black Panther.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that Black Panther can't be in the company of Amour if they came out the same year and they were both good enough to be in that category. The Academy is showing that they're recognizing new types of films, and this is an excellent example of what they're doing to prove that. I'm all good vibes about this particular film being being in this category. And I also, what a great film to like kick off the discussion of this whole category with. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, it's alphabetically the first film, but at the same time, it is in a lot of ways unlike anything else in this category. And I'm very pro that. It shows me that we're not looking at the same types of films every year for what's going to end up being in this category. And hey, Tim, I know you and I have done this for 3 years where we've seen all these nominees and we're talking about them individually, giving them their due. However, I know that I can date back at least over a decade now where I've seen every one of the Best Picture nominees, and it's been since they swapped from the 5 up to 10 nominees. And to be honest with you, some years it's hard to get through all of them, mainly because we don't always get them where we live to see them. But then when we finally do get to sit down and I have to watch 3 films that have, like, there's an immensity to how close they all are in theme, in motif, in design. And I'm sitting there going, did these people who vote at the Academy watch anything else this year? I don't feel that this year when I'm watching all of these nominees. I didn't feel that at all. So
I don't think it's going to win. I think it has
I don't either.
I think it has a
I'm
very,
with you on that.
I think it has a very, 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 very low chance of winning. I could be wrong, but I heavily doubt it. And to be honest, I think there are other films that we're going to be talking about, I think, that should win out over it.
And up next is Black Klansman, which is directed by Spike Lee. This is one of the more woke comedy dramas of 2018. It stars John David Washington, Adam Driver, Topher Grace, and Laura Harrier. And it follows the story of Ron Stallworth, who is the first black man hired as a police officer for the Colorado Springs Police Department. At first, Ron is sort of relegated to the records room, where he is daily being, bombarded with some passive racism and some very upfront racism, which is to be expected. It's 1979, and being the first black man to be hired and given a badge and a gun, he's going to be hit with quite a bit of obstacles to overcome. He's even told that in his interview, but he is eager and ready to step up and answer that call. So while he's in the midst of getting bored in the records room, he sort of approaches his police chief and says he wants to become a detective. And upon being given the opportunity, he finds himself not only investigating members of Black Panther meetings, but also the Ku Klux Klan catches his eye. And it sort of leads him down a path, at first sort of on a lark, with a phone call, to going full blown into investigating what the organization is about, what the local chapter there in Colorado Springs is up to. And he's able to convince his superiors that there's more of a threat at the hands of the Klan than there are the Black Panthers. And in doing so, if you watch the trailer, you get a pretty quick education on what happened with Ron Stallworth, who is a real man who really did do this. Based on phone conversation. Oh, go ahead.
I was just say, but just to be clear, this is not the most accurate of depictions. There was a lot of fictionalized stuff going on.
Yes.
And I will say that I think the actual events happened in 1979. I think this takes place in 1972 or 3 or something.
Yeah, they made adjustments to the timetable just for the sake of telling the story through film, I believe. But when you read up on Ron the man, you know that the one thing they did get right was that he did convince the Klan to allow him to become a member over the phone. They had no idea that he was a black man. In fact, David Duke, who is the leader of the National Ku Klux Klan organization at that time, personally filed the paperwork to ensure that he got his membership card. But in the film, he collaborates with a white Jewish colleague named Flip Zimmerman, played by Adam Driver, to sort of play Ron Stallworth in meetings in front of actual Klan members. And so through their undercover investigation, they're trying to figure out if this is a hostile organization, or it goes without saying, a domestic terrorist organization. And that's the term we would use today. I found myself laughing a lot during this film. I'm supposed to. But the humor in this film is part call-out, but also part comedy and truth. And I found it very interesting to see where these characters were going and what was going to unfold. Some of it feels a little too wild, but at the same time, I think the commitments that Spike Lee makes as a director for this film are very, very deliberate. And I'm always behind directors being deliberate. I always get a sense that I'm in for a treat by the end of the film. And while the film is making me laugh constantly, we're sitting here watching, Spike Lee, who is known for being a razor sharp critic of societal injustice. It goes, if you want to go through his pantheon of films, start with Do the Right Thing, and you'll know what I'm talking about if you haven't seen that.
Yeah, particularly with African Americans.
Particularly with African Americans, yes. This film, however, has, strong leading performances by John David Washington, who is the son of Denzel Washington. So acting runs in the family.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Adam Driver is nominated for Best Supporting Actor with his
Oh.
performance in this film. And there's a lot of unease in the way he plays certain scenes that's funny for us, the audience, but not at all funny for his character. And I found that while some of the other performances in the film were very aggressive, they made for excellent scene work between the actors. I would say that on the whole, this was one of the most hilarious yet impacting films I saw throughout the entire year. It draws absolute parallels with the current situation here in the United States. I
Definitely.
think that with Lee, never being one to shy away from speaking his mind, yet he has once again picked up his microphone, and his microphone is film. This is how
Yeah.
he gets across his point. I also want to throw out a special mention to Topher Grace. Yes, that 70s show's Topher Grace, who was cast brilliantly as the Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke in this film. I think that it was a casting choice that had that uncanny resemblance that you want out of an actor. If you look at a picture of David Duke in the 70s and you look at a picture of Topher Grace in this film, it's kind of scary. But his performance was very layered. There's a niceness and a politeness to his character that is unnerving. There is a darkness to his character that you see later in the film that is even more unnerving. And at the same time, he's not really getting, I think, the praise that he deserves. I'm not saying that this is the role he was born to play, but I think this was certainly the role that he was looking for to prove that he is a legitimate actor. And I think that it's a performance that's worth noting because I was so unnerved by a lot of what I was seeing out of him in the film.
Yeah, he through his performance you can kind of see why how the real life David Duke could convince so many people and pull so many people into his cause
Yep.
is because he is, he's not a foaming at the mouth racist or whatever. There is certainly those qualities there, and as you get more into the film, you see more of those qualities. But he's at certain instances, while he's being very racist, he's being kind of charming and polite and helpful and stuff like that. So it's very easy to see how he could win so many people
Yeah.
over.
His form of demagoguery is the scariest
Hmm.
because it's the kind that people easily rally behind and are willing to defend, as opposed to just screaming things that people want to hear. That's
Yeah.
that's not his method. His method is very calculated. I don't want to say it was like a horror movie because there's none of that present in the film. There's
No, no,
there's
no, no.
no like horror tones in the
No.
film, but it's the kind of portrayal that it's hard to talk about it because I think if people really pay attention and read up on what David Duke is like as a person, as a speaker, and of course he's still active today. He spent time in prison at one point, but he is out and he is raising awareness to his cause once again. And seeing this particular portrayal, yeah, I gotta be honest with you. I was really paying attention to everything that was going on in his scenes, and I was unnerved, I was upset, and I like that I'm at an age now, I'm 33, where like I don't just go to movies to be entertained anymore. Sometimes I go to movies to feel, and in the case of Black Klansman, I was feeling a lot of things, and in particular how unnerved I was by Topher Grace's excellent performance.
Oh, we're talking about performances. We really should talk about Adam Driver, who I forgot he was nominated, but I think totally deserves it. He's probably for me my favorite part of the movie. Basically, any scene that he's in, whatever he's doing, I'm just laser focused on it. It's just one of those performances where I enjoy seeing him do anything. I don't know why. It's just he gives something to that performance that is so, even if he's not doing something funny or whatever, it's entertaining and interesting. And oh god, I loved every moment of him in the film. And one of the great things about him is that, and he does this in this movie, he's done this in other movies, even kind of big budgeted blockbuster movies like Star Wars, where even if he's playing something big, it's not in a unbelievable way. It's big in a real world sense, and he brings that to all of his performances. So there's always a reality to it, and in this one, he's really funny. Like the film itself, he's really funny at certain points. Then there's other points that are very deep. Like, and the film doesn't go terribly far into this, but the fact that he is playing a Jewish man, and we don't know if the real life partner of Ron Starworth was Jewish. The real life person has not gone public because of his role in the investigation, but for the film, Spike Lee made him Jewish. But anyway, the fact that he is Jewish in the film, a Jewish character, is they do play with that a little bit, and there's some deep moments where Adam Driver's character is talking about being Jewish and his thoughts on being Jewish, which I think are very interesting and again real, and I really enjoyed those. What did you feel about him?
I think that this is an incredibly deserving nomination for Best Supporting Actor. I think that his performance, and this is the thing I love about Adam Driver, he's got a good look to him just on camera. Wherever he's in, it doesn't matter if it's a Star Wars film film, if it's Girls on HBO, if it's Spike Lee's Black Klansman, whatever he's in, he brings a sincerity and a truth to everything he plays. And
Mhm.
like you mentioned earlier, the scene with where they talk about his faith, and really in a way it's kind of a lack of faith for his character, because he talks about how, like, I was raised and told I was Jewish, but I'm not a practicing Jew. I don't really have massive memories and recollections of going to temple or anything like that. But for his character, it becomes about a right and wrong situation. The right thing for him to do is to be in this investigation. The wrong thing for him to do is to sit back and let this stuff that he has now had a front row seat to continue. And it really takes shape for him and his character when he starts to see these guys carrying guns around and, shooting metal targets that are painted like animated caricatures of black children. And it's unnerving to him, but he's also in the scenes playing it very undercover cop. I do think that and look, I'm not criticizing the film for not giving me this, but I would have loved to have seen more of the repercussions on his character when he's not, on duty, when he's not with the members of the clan. I would have loved to have seen what his personage was going through at that time. And also, if there was ever any conflict between him and Stallworth that was real during the investigation. Because again, like, Stallworth is doing everything by phone. And then he's got his guy out there in the field, and that is a massive risk if he's
Mhm.
ever found out to be an undercover cop. I want to also give a shout out in the film, and I have to look her up because I don't know her name. But the actress who plays the one Klansman's wife, she's the one actress who, this is going to kill me, but I gotta know because she was one of my favorite parts of the whole movie.
I think it's
Ashley Atkinson is her name, and she
Mhm.
plays the character of Connie Kendrickson. This actress brought so much to every scene that she was in. And I've been in love with these performances this year, and I've started to pay more attention to this in film when I see an actor who has a small part in a film, but their performance is in no way small, meaning they don't care who they're in a scene with. They're going to do everything they can with the material they're given to bring gravitas to the scenes that they're in. And in her case, part of it is comedy, part of it is you feel sorry for her character, because she's clearly been indoctrinated from a young age. She's being manipulated in a lot of ways. And there's a lovability to her approach to this that makes her dangerous. That's another layer in this film that I think, puts it very high on my list of films for 2018. But she is one of those who I don't think we've seen the last of her as an actress. And by the way, she has 76 credits to her name. She's not hurting for work. All
She's
right.
very
But
busy, yeah.
but at the same time, this is the first thing I've seen her in and been really just taken aback, because I found all the work she was doing to be excellent. And I think that that's a testament to, Lee as a director. He knows how to direct his actors, but if you follow the way he directs a lot of his material, there's also a natural element to the performances that he wants actors to bring something to the table. And I think when he saw what she was doing, he really put the camera on her at all the right points. And by the way, there's probably footage of her that we're never going to get to see, but what we do get of her is excellent. And I think that says something to, how well this film was cut together. It is not the flashiest editing of the year, but I think that it was pretty succinct in the way that it was put together. I do think that it has one of the best scripts of the year. I think that certainly one of the best directors, and not because of his work. I think this particular film is an excellent film, and I think that if anybody was going to make a film that has sort of a pissed off nature to it, and yet rather than get pissed off and be screaming in our faces, he's pissed off, but he made a comedy that is irreverent and razor sharp in a lot of ways, it was going to be Spike Lee. And I think that his nomination for Best Director is very fitting on the whole. This is personally one of my favorite films in this category. And I would love, if they told me this was the film that was going to win, I'd be fine with it. But I don't think it's going to.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too. I will say the comedy element I think was wise to do because since this could be very I mean it is very serious material, something dealing with racism and the Klan and the kind of societal issues that are still very present today. I think comedy is a good way to get people to come and see the film and to kind of help them deal with it a bit more than maybe a straight drama would, where maybe they would be fearful to even come see the film because they don't want to, because you said you're kind of okay with seeing films like this, but a lot of people don't like being made uncomfortable, and this film does make you uncomfortable, don't get me wrong, but it helps you a little bit with the comedy, which is genuinely good. It is a very good script, and that the comedy and the drama are very good. I will say it is more of a comedy to a certain degree than really it is a drama. The drama aspects of it come in more near the end,
Yes.
particularly with the very end. I won't go too much into it, but it does have footage, like actual news footage from recent events that very much the film has commented on in its story, and it ends on a very sad, tragic, and very, very, very serious note. So it kind of gives you this comedy with bits of drama throughout, and then really right at the very end just punches you with the reality of what's still going on, what still needs to be done. So it is not Black Panther in the sense that I don't know, not something you're gonna want to watch for necessarily a good time, even if it is a comedy. But it's something I think is very important, and I think because of that, yeah, it's one of my favorites.
I think whereas Black Panther, where it takes off its shroud of subtlety at the end of its film with a
Mm-hmm.
couple of very good lines from Killmonger, this film doesn't even own a shroud of subtlety. This film is attacking these social justice issues head on through comedy and some drama. But then at the end, once the credits are about to roll, they cut to a montage of archived footage shot on phones, shot on news cameras, etc., of the Charlottesville marches and the violence that unfolded at all of these protests. And
Mm-hmm.
it shows that in a lot of ways, things aren't really changing, and the violence and the problems and the bigotry in this country are still very real.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Spike gets his point across in
Mm-hmm.
this. And there are a few films in this category that I think are willing to be as abrasive, and I don't want to use that word in a negative context, that want to be as abrasive and upfront with their message. So, looking down the list of 8, they all have a message, an important one.
Mm-hmm.
This one I think I would put at the highest rung on the ladder as far as message goes. That's why, for me, it's personally one of my favorites of the year, why it's also one of my favorites in this category. I have other ideas about what's going to happen with who's going to win and all that, but I would love to see this film win Best Picture. I think
Mm-hmm.
this would be a good film to award Best Picture to.
It is possible after seeing it. I think it is possible, though, for other reasons. I think it might not. But I think abrasive is a good word to use. I mean, Spike Lee is very, or at least can be, maybe not all the time, but can be very abrasive in his films. I think this one works better than his recent-ish film, Chirac, which in some cases I think did oversimplify some of the issues that he was talking about in that film. And I don't think he has that problem in this film, so I commend him for that. Yeah, this film really hit hard, I think. It really went up to one of my favorites, which I was not expecting it to. I don't know if it's going to win or not. I think there are two other films that are more likely to win, whether they deserve to or not, but we'll get to those later on. So for our next film, we're going to be talking about Bohemian Rhapsody. It is one of, I guess you would classify this as a musical. It is one of 2 musicals that we have this year, and is obviously based off of the life and times of Queen, the British band. So this film basically covers from when the band forms to right at the end of their famous Live Aid performance in 1985. So it covers a good chunk, not all of it, but a good chunk of Queen's history. Mainly focuses on Freddie Mercury. They do have the other band members in there, and the other 3 all get their kind of time in the sun, but is primarily about Freddie Mercury and his life, his struggles, his problems with drugs and alcohol, his kind of wild party lifestyle, his relationship with his wife. He was bisexual, some of the relationships he had with men, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of its main focus, and it focuses on his brilliance with stuff, and also the brilliance of the other band performers. And it touches on most of the main instances of that band and their biggest songs and how they were created and stuff like that. This film, just as a little background real quick, was in development for I think a very long time. I don't know if I think it was Mike Myers is in this film in a small part. I think at one point he was going to play Freddie Mercury. I think, even though he was way too old to play him. And then it switched eventually to Sacha Baron Cohen. He dropped out. He had disagreements with the directions that they went with. Eventually, Bryan Singer did direct it. He was let go at one point, and another director finished the film uncredited. And eventually, they did get Rami Malek to play Freddie Mercury, which I think while I would have loved to have seen Sacha Baron Cohen in this part, especially because Sacha Baron Cohen is great at transforming himself. He would be great in this part. He would have been great in this part. I'm sad we didn't get to see him in this part. But Rami Malek, while being very, very different from Sacha Baron Cohen in the way his career's gone, the stuff he has picked, and his acting style, he was also a very good choice to play this part. I think maybe partially because I'm not terribly familiar with Rami Malek as a person, I was able to basically just kind of forget a lot of the time that I was watching him as a performance. I was just seeing Freddie Mercury, so I commend him for that. Sadly, I mean, and I think Rami Malek is probably the highlight of the film, probably the thing most people are going to come away with loving about it. I will say, I think unfortunately, most of the other aspects of the film could be a lot better. I think this is one of the lower rung Best Picture nominees this year because I know one of the criticisms I saw early on before I had seen the movie, because I just saw it recently, I wasn't able to see it for a very long time, was that it was almost, some people complained that it was almost kind of like a Wikipedia summary of the band's history, but without necessarily saying a whole lot. And I kind of agree in that, because I watched the film knowing that criticism, and I tried to watch it and see, okay, what is the point of this film? Why make this film? What is it trying to say about Freddie Mercury and or about Queen as, Queen as a band and what they meant to society and to music and all that stuff. And I don't know if it really says anything that justifies its existence. Really, the greatest thing besides giving a kind of maybe teaching people maybe a bit more about Queen as a band, even though I think that you could get that from a documentary or a book or whatever. Besides that, and maybe helping introduce some people to Queen who are not familiar with, which I know has happened with some younger people who have seen the movie, is that I think it reminds you or makes you aware of why the band was so brilliant and why Freddie Mercury was so brilliant. I think it does kind of capture the kind of impact and the excitement about their band on society at that time and the exciting wave that they caused with the different approaches they made with the title song Bohemian Rhapsody and just the things that they were doing with interacting with the audience and all these different things. I think it captures that brilliantly. I don't know if it's really saying anything beyond that, though, that I think really makes it something that really should have been made. But how do you feel about it?
So I have a lot of conflicting thoughts on this film. One, I do enjoy Rami Malek. Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury. I think in the end he is the right choice. I think that a lot of the control over this story came from three people. One and two are Roger Taylor and Brian May, the two remaining, active personalities of Queen. And John Deacon, I'm sure, had a hand in it, but John Deacon has been retired from public life for a very long time. The other thing is Mary Austin, who was Freddie's close personal friend at one point, lover, fiance. They never actually married.
Oh, they didn't?
But
Oh, okay.
but he left a vast majority of his estate to her. It was split with him and with her and his partner. She was always a part of his life, even after they broke up as a couple, that kind of thing. So, they had to kind of wing it on her story because she wanted to maintain a lot of her own privacy. I mean, like, she didn't give them the okay to film in his house, so they had to kind of find another home that sort of matched the description. Things like that. It wasn't, in the end, actual locations were not really used in a lot of cases, and at the same time, a lot of the story was dictated by Taylor and May. That was really where Sacha Baron Cohen fell out in the earlier attempts to get this movie made. He did not want to end at Live Aid. He wanted to end where Freddie dies, and he wanted to explore the torturous, effects of AIDS killing him slowly, leading to the end of his life. They did not. And they wanted this to be more of a Queen film than a Freddie film, which I can understand because it was an ensemble band.
And Freddie, just to interrupt you for a second, Freddie,
Yeah.
they even have Freddie mention in the film that he is not the lead of Queen. He's just the lead singer of Queen. He's not like the leader
Correct.
or anything. Which I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know if he actually said in real life or not.
No,
But
and the other thing, well, he might have, but the other issues I had with the film were it messes with timeline quite a bit. For example, there's a scene in the film, it's shown in one of the side clips and also featured in the trailer where Brian May talks about wanting a song for the crowd to sing, and We Will Rock You is the song that they clap and stomp to, and you see the song taking shape. I don't remember the exact dates, but they talk about how that was, I think, 1981. That song had been recorded and released in 1977, but for the sake of where the narrative was in the film, they played with all of that. And again, the deeper the Queen fan you are, and you can spot dates and know that there's incorrect things there, that there's age play going on with certain actors. For example, Aidan Gillen's character, who's their manager, he's 49 years old when he's playing this part, but the guy himself was 26 at the time. Mike Myers' character is not a real person. He's actually an amalgamation of several executives, but it's Mike Myers, so it works really well. But it only told part of the story. It didn't really tell the whole story. And again, I get it. It's a 2 hour, film that has a lot of ground to cover. But there's other things about it, like when Freddie wanted to make his solo album and the band goes ape shit on him. That didn't happen. Roger Taylor had already released 2 albums solo by the time Freddie released his first.
Yeah,
Um,
they show them breaking up, which they never actually did.
yeah, there was strife within the band, but not enough for them not to play.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, they didn't ostracize Freddie. Freddie just went and did his own thing. I have all these little nitpick critiques, and I know that that's what they are. They're nitpick critiques based off my knowledge of the band, based off of stories I've heard and read, documentaries I've watched, and things like that. That doesn't discount the good in this film. The good in the film is in the performances. I actually think my favorite performance in the whole film is the young actor who's playing Brian May. I think that he channeled Brian May, and his name is Gwillem Lee. He's very good. Malik, of course, is deserving of all the attention he's getting from awards season and all this other critic play and fan reaction and all that. I think all the concert footage in this film, the way that they did it, the big production elements that they put behind it, namely, of course, the Live Aid sequence at the end of the film, it's all excellent.
Yeah.
It really, I think, helped capture the dynamic charisma and glam that was the glam rock of Queen, which you can see in watching those performances from these actors, replicating what live audiences got to see on a regular basis. You can definitely see how Queen became one of the most talked about bands of all time, even if they weren't as appreciated as they should have been at first in their own era. The vocal power of Freddie, the guitar, precision of Brian May. Deacon was an excellent musician. He was like a through and through musician, and it's sad that he doesn't play anymore publicly. And then, of course, Roger Taylor. I don't know if there's anything the guy couldn't do with a set of drums. And he was a hell of a singer as well. So this is one of those bands that is so ripe for a film to be made about it. In the end, this film did run into a lot of production issues. Bryan Singer is under extreme accusations that, I would think are going to shut him out of Hollywood. And if any of it's true, he should be. I don't think there's any argument there.
Yeah, and while I think Rami Malek will win Best Actor, it's pretty much going to cost this film any chance at winning Best Picture. It's gotten nominated, but I think because of the controversy around that and some of the stuff that changes they make with Freddie Mercury in this movie, that it's pretty much going to guarantee it's not going to win just because of that controversy.
And I gotta be honest, I was very surprised with how glowing the Hollywood Foreign Press was toward this film. Winning Best Film, and I was a little surprised by that considering what it was up against. I don't see it winning the Oscar.
No.
I don't see it coming even close to winning the Oscar. I would have problems if it did because I don't think it's that great of a film.
No,
I think it has a lot of story beat issues. I think that it has some editing problems in places. I do think that what it got right, it got very right, but it has a lot of problems when it comes to being a tight 2 hour film about, one of the greatest bands of all time. And in the end, I think that this is a crowd pleaser film.
I felt really good. Out of all the films, I felt very kind of the most kind of happy after leaving it.
Of course, but I don't think that, and I felt the same way too. I mean, yes, this is the thing. My review of this film, when I did get a chance to review it on radio, I was talking about how I enjoyed this, but I don't think this is very good.
Yeah.
I hate that that's a very simple one-sentence review because there's so much to talk about in terms of the performance and the execution of the concerts and that replication of the Live Aid stuff, which was outstanding. And for a movie that was made for only like $56 million, it looks like a $150 million movie. However, I do have a lot of issues with some of the accolades that it has been, the accolade attention that it's been getting, because I think that it is kicking better films out of the picture.
Yeah.
However, it's a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
So I can't deny that it's enjoyable. I can deny that it's great. In any.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Aside from Malik's performance,
yeah,
which I think is great.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people are giving this and another movie we'll talk about later a lot of flack for the attention it's getting over other films, which I agree with to a certain extent. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, I think a very uplifting film in certain respects. I get the criticisms that it's run into, and obviously, yes, it'll bug Queen fanatics. For people who don't know about it, those things won't bother them at all, I don't think. But this film, I mean, it's worth seeing. I think especially if you're a Queen fan. I don't think it's stand out enough to really even get a nomination, at least for Best Picture. Some other aspects of it, sure, but not Best Picture. I don't think it's really has a chance in heck of winning, but I don't know. I guess it gave me a chance to see it, and I'm happy I saw it. But beyond that, I mean, I don't think it's deserves the high accolade of Best Picture. So
No, I agree with you. This film, for me, still will go down as a gross missed opportunity for a lot of reasons. And it's because if you check out any documentary or docudrama of any kind that's made about Freddie Mercury, of which, by the way, there are quite a few, you're going to feel like this movie missed out on so many interesting elements of what made one of the, most iconic talents of all time in the music business iconic. And part of it, honestly, what this film, another thing, it's something that this film does get right. Part of it is the band that was with him. However, I just felt like this film was very paint by numbers and still messy at the same time. I felt like it took a very safe approach. No feathers were ruffled, other than what happened, on set in the making of this film and putting it out there for it to be consumed. Is it enjoyable? Yes. Is it a crowd pleaser? Yes. But do I feel like there was so much more that I wanted to see out of a film about Queen and Freddie? Yes. That, to me, just keeps it from rising to the top of this category, and I don't see it taking home that statue. And you know what? Best of luck to Malik. He's in really, really good company in the lead actor category. However, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel for that film in Best Picture. All right, and so our fourth nominee in the Best Picture category for the 2019 Oscars is The Favorite, which is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, who audiences might remember from directing The Killing of a Sacred Deer, I believe it was last year, and then the year before that was The Lobster.
2015, I think, is The Lobster.
15 was The Lobster, yes. So he tends to work with, I wouldn't say like a troupe, but he has actors he's collaborated with before. You will see similarities of them being used. For example, Colin Farrell appeared in The Lobster, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. This in particular film, The Favorite, features Olivia Colman, who he has collaborated with, as well as Rachel Weisz. So he loves to make movies that they're a bit out there, I think, for the average moviegoer. Is the easiest way for me to say it. I don't want to say that in a bad way, because I don't think it's a bad way. I know that if his name is attached, I'm in for a bit of a trip, so to speak. And this particular film explores the relationship between Queen Anne of England and her longtime friend, in fact, probably her closest confidant, Lady Sarah. And this is while the Queen's health debilitates and her temper keeps getting more and more volatile. She goes through fits where, one day she's perfectly cognizant and the next day she can end up acting like a petulant child. Because of this, Lady Sarah tends to handle affairs of state in the Queen's proxy, and she has a bit of her own agenda when she does sort of step into that realm of politics. England at this time is at war with the French, the treasury is in shambles, decadence is running wild throughout the court, which this film quite comically displays in multiple sequences. And then in the end, this is really a beautifully shot period piece. It's filled with growing intrigue amongst the characters. Think Game of Thrones if it's very British. Despite being written and directed by a Greek guy, the film is very English in the way it handles its humor, some of its characterizations, and rather than being sort of a Game of Thrones medieval style, it's more in the, I believe it's the 18th century. And just say that we're not talking about anything mystical. There's nothing. This is just straight up English politics involving the monarchy.
It should be said that this is, while there are certain things that are true in it, the film intentionally takes a lot of licenses with true events. Do not go by this for history by any means. The director intentionally, and has admitted freely, and the actors have, that they changed a lot of stuff. So
and fabricated things for the sake of comedy in a lot of sequences,
and
but
conjectured
also
about a lot of stuff too.
Yes, and they also did this for great drama, which we'll get to. And that's sort of a beginning, opening salvo of how to explain what's going on in this movie. But the other big thing is Emma Stone, who most recently won an Oscar for La La Land, was sort of an aristocratic young woman who had a troubled past. Her father apparently lit his whole house on fire and burned himself to death inside of it, wiping the family's fortune into non-existence. And Emma's character Abigail is related to Rachel Weisz's character Lady Sarah, and she comes to her in hopes of getting a job so that she can work and have something to do. She has her own agenda that starts to sort of weave its own little quilt of intrigue as the film begins to progress. This is a film where all three of the leading ladies, Olivia Colman for Queen Anne, Rachel Weisz for Lady Sarah, and Emma Stone for Abigail, they're all nominated for Oscars. Colman for Best Actress, the other two for Best Supporting Actress.
I should say, though, I think both of those categories should be reversed.
There's a good discussion to be had there, I think. I find that I actually think it would have been the first time you could have put three actresses from the same film in Best Actress, just because I think they're actually all about even in terms of screen time, for one reason or another. Because this film is not a short film. I wouldn't say it's an overly long film either, but by the end of it, you definitely get a sense that it took all three of them in some form of like a cinematic acting tripod to make this film work as well as it does.
Oh no, yeah, yeah. You need all of them. If any of them had done a bad job, the whole thing probably would have collapsed on itself.
Exactly. And I think for me, the reason why this film works so well and definitely deserves the nomination for Best Picture, most certainly, is excellent direction. The acting in this film is some of the finest I saw all year. It's also some of the funniest I saw all year. And some of the best dramatic acting that I saw all year, especially from Olivia Colman. The cinematography in this film is, I believe this is one of the few Best Picture nominees actually shot on film. It was shot on 35 mil.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I was reading an article today about what shot what, and a lot of the stuff shot digital. And the next film we'll talk about was actually shot in 8K.
Oh,
which is pretty cool, you know, the technological advancements and everything. But The Favorite was shot on 35 millimeter, and they actually used some Nikkor glass. They used a lot of wide angle lenses, super wide angle lenses. There's actually fisheye photography in this movie.
There's a lot of fisheye photography.
But I think it works for one reason or another. This film will go down as one of my favorite shot films. It took a lot of chances, I think, with some of the lens choices in certain sequences. But for the first time ever, I was watching a movie shot in actual palaces, and I was getting to see the rooms that they're being shot in. I wasn't getting a lot of close-up photography on faces with blurred backgrounds and just assumed paintings and tapestries and all this other stuff. These people were actually in a royal palace, and they were acting in the real environment, which I can only imagine, you know, helped make these performances even better. And the royal grounds, you know, all the groundskeeping, you're not just trapped inside of living quarters. You're actually out on the property. You're seeing the kitchens of what these places look like. It was so, I don't know how to explain it other than I liked that it felt real. The sets that they were on, they felt real more than a lot of things. Now, not all the films that we've talked about, but for whatever reason, the photography choices in this film really stood out for me.
Well, they also, to kind of add to the realism of it, they, well, I don't know if that was why they did it, but for you, maybe it added to the realism. I think they used almost, not entirely, but almost entirely natural lighting.
Yes,
So.
and I was going to say the movie that I'm not saying it drew inspiration from, although I haven't read anything Lanthimos has said. Maybe he did say this, but Barry Lyndon from Stanley Kubrick is a film that I think is as close as you can get using a lot of natural light. There is a lot of shallow depth of field photography, but it's not distractingly so. I mean, they do a lot of wide angle, you know, when the sun is out and you're seeing these large, you know, palatial rooms. It feels just rich. Every image was rich. And the other thing is the comedy in this movie, because I have to keep coming back to the fact that it's a comedy. A lot of it is satirical in some ways. A lot of it it's human. You know, very comedy of errors oriented stuff occurs in this film. There's a lot of, you know, emotional and political gambles that are taken by certain characters that some pay off, some don't. At no point did I feel disconnected from this film while I was watching it. And I'm not saying I didn't feel that during the others, but The Favorite, Lanthimos, for whatever reason, I don't know if this was one of my favorite films of the year, but I know that this was certainly a unique viewing experience because of how much I laughed, and I just felt like I was in it. And I liked that about it.
Yeah, it's certainly, I think, probably the most unique film in the category. It's really, I mean, totally stands out. And yeah, I was totally engrossed in it the whole time. I think the only times I ever, not necessarily took myself out of the film, but just slightly kind of looked around the theater was during some of the more kind of, what's the word, maybe scandalous moments in the movie, which there are some. And
yes, there are.
Also, along the similar lines, the movie probably in an un-British way is very crass, and they will do things I think partially you wouldn't expect just because it's a period piece, you don't expect them to do that, and some of the humor can come out of that. Somebody we should mention is Nicholas Hoult is also in the movie as one of the leading people in Parliament, who is competing. Basically, his end goal is really to become prime minister. He is not. He is in the he's not in the ruling party.
He's in the minority party.
He's a minority party.
Is what it is.
So he basically wants to prop his party up, become prime minister. He has a certain view about how the war with the French should end. The other party has another idea of how it should end, and he's competing for the Queen to go with his way, and he wants to become prime minister. So those are his goals there. But he is probably one of my favorite characters in the movie. He's probably one of the funniest characters in the movie. He doesn't get as much screen time as the others, and his character maybe there isn't as much to him in terms of depth and stuff, but he is always a joy to see on screen, and he plays with the other people very well. Emma Stone, I know she won Oscar last year for La La Land, which in my opinion I think probably should have gone to somebody else, but that's just my opinion. But in this, I think she gives a very good performance. I mean, if anything, I think she should win for this. I mean, I don't think she will, just because, I mean, politically and stuff, she won one last year, so I doubt she'll win again this year. I mean, it shouldn't be that way, but I think that might be a reason why she won't win. But for me, I knew from the trailer that she was going to be up to something. But I think if you watch the movie without that, you'll be kind of unsure for a very long time what exactly she's up to. Even though Rachel Weisz is very suspicious of her from pretty much the get-go, you kind of don't know. You know, she does some stuff that you think, oh, maybe she is trying to do something, and then she does some other stuff to think, okay, maybe Rachel Weisz is just overreacting. And it's a very complex character who keeps you guessing, I think, for a long time. Eventually, you kind of get an idea of what she's trying to do, but you can see how she can manipulate the Queen to kind of do what she wants. And I guess the last person I would mention, I don't have much to say about Rachel Weisz, but Olivia Colman, who is getting just tons of accolades for this. I feel like she's shown a little bit less in the movie, but maybe that's just me. But I think one thing that's interesting about her, and I think was a kind of a nice choice, is that they don't, while she certainly talks about her past a little bit and some of the tragic things that have happened to her and have led to her this terrible depression that she is in, they don't go into tons of detail about it, which I really like. They kind of let you do a lot of guesswork about her,
Hmm.
and they don't spell things out. They leave a lot of mysterious about her. I mean, she doesn't, they don't even mention, they mention that she was pregnant multiple times, but they never mention her husband by name. They never see a photo of him. They never mention that he died, even though technically he's supposed to be dead by this point. But so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff they just leave you having to guess with, which I think is great. I think it's much more interesting than spelling everything out. But I will say, when I saw the trailer for this movie, it starts with the scene with Olivia Colman and Rachel Weisz near the beginning of the movie, actually. And the trailer shows some of the comedy in it, and I was really interested in that. I thought it was really funny. And then the trailer took a turn into being very weird. And after seeing that, I was like, okay, I don't know if I was interested in this, but I don't know if I want to see this movie now, because I don't typically like weird movies. And those are movies that I just feel like, you watch them and you wonder if the person was on drugs when they made them, because they're just very, very strange. I tend not to get into those. But I kind of knew that going into this movie that, okay, well, at least I thought, okay, this will probably be a bit weird. And I hadn't seen any of the other director's stuff. I had heard of The Lobster and, the other one you mentioned, Killing of the Deer, or
Killing of
whatever.
a Sacred Deer. Yeah.
Killing of Sacred Deer, but I had not seen them. And I knew The Lobster was a bit odd, but I hadn't seen them. So I went to this, excited about it, because I'd heard a lot of great things about it, but also kind of a bit worried that I might not like it because it's weird. But I think, strangely enough, well, two things. One, I think it helps for me, and this is all very subjective, but that it's weird, but it's not too weird. There's still some grounding in reality. It's not like certainly strange, but it's not so strange that I couldn't get into it. But also, I think the strangeness of it mixed with the kind of balancing of comedy, I mean, genuinely funny comedy, the tragedy and sorrow of drama with Olivia Colman's character and the other drama that's going on, really all mixed well with it, along with the cinematography of it, the musical choice, which uses a lot of, I don't know the exact instrument, but uses a lot of string.
Harpsichord. There's a lot of harpsichord in the
Yeah, there's
film.
a lot
In
of.
fact, some of it is like natural harpsichord in the scene.
Oh,
Like people are playing these instruments like
yeah.
live and I mean, of course, it's probably a non-diegetic like on a technical level, but at the same time, it's supposed to be like it's happening
Yeah.
on within the room.
Yeah, and
Um,
they use a lot of that, which I think, strangely enough, even though I was worried about the strangeness of it, I think it all really works in the movie's favor.
Yeah, this is a film, and I really have to talk about the director for just a minute. There was a screening that I went to when I saw The Lobster. I actually saw it coupled with a Q&A with Colin Farrell that was moderated by Bryan Cranston. So
Oh dear.
it was an odd, like, yeah. And The Lobster is a bizarre film. The basic premise of it is bizarre. The
Yeah.
actual film itself is bizarre. The ending is bizarre. A lot of people have questions about what was going on in that movie even after they see it. You would be possibly surprised to know that the actors who were in the film still have questions about the film they were in, because Farrell was very open about how much respect and how much trust he had in Lanthimos, and the same thing for his co-star Rachel Weisz. I don't know the exact pronunciation of her last name.
I think
I'm
it's
gonna go.
Vice.
I'm going to go with Vice. So I think she had worked with Lanthimos before
Mm-hmm.
that, and Farrell was stepping into work, and Coleman was there as well. So it's not like there's an unfamiliarity, but Lanthimos has a very on-the-fly approach to how scenes are constructed. And this particular film, I think he was much more organized and structured and trying to build scenes that were almost like a Kubrick style, like complete control over where everyone stands, looks, handles things, and then we craft the story. And then when it came to the intimate moments where the actors are actually having, banter back and forth, or the camera isn't close on someone, he leaves that up to his actors. And this is the reason why Farrell was so appreciative of him, is he's like, he gave me like a loose roadmap as an actor, and then he let me go. If he didn't get what he wanted, he told me, and we would do it again. And if he did get what we wanted, we moved on to the next thing. There was no hang-ups, there was no frustration, I'm not saying there wasn't frustration at all during the making of The Lobster, but knowing through, Farrell's own words and then applying them to watching all of Lanthimos's work, I'm sitting here thinking, well, this is a film that has a lot more moving parts to it. It isn't just a couple of actors on screen in the woods, which is what a lot of The Lobster is. This is massive amounts of people at times on screen. This is choreographed dance numbers. This is
odd dance numbers.
Odd dance numbers, very, very intimate scenes that are, there's one scene in this movie that, for me, if you wanted to plead a case for Olivia Colman actually winning Best Actress, and I would like to believe that she has a shot. I don't think it's an overwhelming one, but I'd like to think she has a shot. There's a sequence in the movie where they dress Queen Anne up and they're taking her to a party in the palace, and they roll her in and she's sitting in a wheelchair because her legs are very blistered. Yeah, she's got gout and several other issues where she can't really walk. And she's sitting there watching Lady Sarah dance, and it looks like this great time. And you actually have a slow zoom of the camera in onto her face, and you see joy turn into complete and utter grief, turn into complete and utter anger. And for whatever reason, that was one of the most impacting performance moments I saw all year, where a director, a camera, and an actor, that's all it took. I didn't need to see it. There was juxtaposition. There were cuts to what was happening in front of her. But then all of a sudden, it locked on her and it didn't move. And it was a long take. Not obnoxiously long, but long enough. Because then she has an outburst and wants to be taken out and wants that party shut down and doesn't want anything to do with it. And, of course, her loyal subjects, they don't question it. They just go back about their daily business, which is to, go get drunk in another room. But in the case of that performance, I'm sitting here just walking away from it going, look, somebody could tell me they watched this movie and they hated this movie. But I don't know of a single person who could watch this film and not at least see what I saw in terms of how good and layered and rich Olivia Colman's performance was in the film.
Yeah, you just want to do something for her because she is so tragic in this movie and just is such a broken character in person. She doesn't deserve to be kind of in the middle of this political battle, not just between Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone, but all the other people around her. Really are just using her for their own means, and none of them really care about her at all. It's maybe a bit up for argument with Rachel Weisz, but, they're all using her in some way. And, ultimately, I think if there's anybody to be sympathetic for, it's her, and she's, I think, really the only good person in the movie.
Right.
Despite she has outbursts and stuff, but it's all coming from this terrible grief, and she wants to do well by her country and her people and stuff, but she's just so broken that she can't do it. And Olivia Colman does that wonderfully.
What I found interesting, just piggybacking off of what you just said, the thing about her performance and the character that she's playing is that the sympathy doesn't just come from the fact that she's ill. Like she has these ailments. She's got, I don't know, gout one day, and then the next, like she's got Bell's palsy, because that is something that afflicted the character. It looked like near the end of the film, where she, one whole side of her face was numb and she was trying to do the best with what she had. There's also the emotional trauma that the character has been through, and the mental illness that she's battling while also trying to be a functional monarch.
Which is all true, by the way. That stuff was true.
That is all true. Yes, Queen Anne of England suffered a great deal of ailments throughout her entire life, and eventually one of them took her. And at a young age, she wasn't even that old.
She was, I think, like 49, I think.
Yeah. So and her reign was not nearly as long. We have lived in a time when all we've ever known is Queen Elizabeth. However, Queen Anne did reign for a fairly decent period of time, but it was filled with a lot of trouble, personal for her, because of her conditions. And I say conditions because there were multiple that she had to deal with. I think the film did capture that very well. I think Coleman captured that very well. And you're right about that. All the manipulation that goes on in using her as a pawn. And in the film, when Anne has a good day, nobody tries to play games with her. They only go after her like vultures when she's weak. When she's having a good day, it's supposed to be fun, games, no questions, no politics, no nothing. When she's having a bad day, that's when they bring the politics to her. And interestingly enough, Emma Stone's character, the intrigue with her, for me, and it's in the performance 100%. I don't ever believe that Emma Stone is really, her character Abigail is out for political gain.
No, not really.
All she wants is station in life gain, because she's come to this palace as a servant, and she simply wants to be back on footing with where her birthright put her. in her mind.
Yeah.
She doesn't care about, the goings on, the wars, the treasury, or any of these other things. She only cares about being able to get back to wearing nice dresses, partying, being a young person who's happy, because she's been abused and treated poorly by her family, who then completely abandoned her. So there's a lot to care about, I think, but her actions leads you to care a lot less about her by the end of the film. And the same thing with Rachel Weisz's character. She has a hell of a performance, and she's not one who has ever gone without playing a character similar to this. Neil Bute's The Shape of Things, where she's kind of a villainous character. She can be a very likable villain, and she is in this. So there's a lot of things to unpack when you watch this movie. I mean, it's a lot of layered performances. It's a period film that looks very, very accurate. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it felt transportive, and that's good. That's the goal, right? And it's also just brilliantly directed, I think, from start to finish.
Yeah, and going back to something you had said earlier, it is very well constructed. It's almost like, I think this is partially because of the music. Sometimes it has these long musical sequences of different kind of things happening, kind of a montage of things happening, and all that stuff. I think that contributes to this feeling I have. But it's almost kind of like almost like a symphony almost, where in order for it to work, everything needs to be there. So like every scene needs to be there, every moment, every musical cue, everything needs to be there, and it's just absolutely constructed like that. And so it just perfectly goes together. It's probably the best constructed film of the year. And yeah, it is one of my favorite films of
Pun intended.
yeah, of the year. And I mean, if people haven't seen it, go out and see it. Especially if you haven't seen any of the other directors' stuff, it'll probably be not like anything you have seen probably recently.
I would just say I agree with Tim. I think that going into this film, know that you're in for a treat. Whether it's a treat you think is too rich or too sour or whatever, that's up to you when you see it. But it's not going to be like anything else you saw this year. But it is under the guise in the trailer of looking like a period film that is set in English high society. And if that's something you enjoy, you're going to be in for, I think, a nice trip is the easiest way to say it, because it's a brilliant film, but it's not the easiest to recommend to people. And I would also agree with you in saying that it is one of my favorite films of 2018. I think that it could do okay on Oscar Sunday. I don't know where I stack it right now, because, anybody can go out and read who they think has the most steam going in to win Best Picture and blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of controversy going on with that right now. But honestly, if you really want to get down to it and talk about critic response, audience who have seen this film, this is one of the best films of 2018. I'm glad it's in that category.
I think it has a pretty good chance. I think it's probably one of two, maybe three films I think has a really good chance of getting that award. Okay, we're going to launch into the next film, which is Green Book. It's another one that's based on a true story. Green Book follows 1960s family man / working class New York Italian bouncer, Tony Vallelongo, also known as Tony Lip. But he takes a job driving an African-American classical and jazz pianist, Dr. Don Shirley, played by Mahershala. Why don't you say it, Blake? Because I can't.
Mahershala Ali.
Yeah, thank you. To all his gigs during an 8-week tour in the Deep South. Tony is uneducated and foul-mouthed. He's played by Viggo Mortensen. And Tony is no stranger to talking his way out of problems or roughing people up if he needs to get his way or to please whoever he's working for. Educated and straight-laced Dr. Shirley doesn't approve of Tony's methods or his vulgar attitude, but he does need someone like Tony if he hopes to navigate the Deep South while black. During the tour, they run into trouble with casual and not so casual racist bar patrons, clothes shop owners, wealthy elites, police officers, and restaurant owners. While racist himself, Tony begins to take a liking to Dr. Shirley and vice versa, and a friendship begins to form between the two. One of the best things this film has going for it is that it's about the real life Dr. Don Shirley, who I didn't know about. My wife, who's much more versed in music, didn't know about, and I think a lot of people don't know about. And I don't know, I actually didn't look. I don't know if anybody else has done a film about him before, but I'm glad that at very least that this one was made and was with high-profile actors and very, very good actors, namely Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about, the other guy.
Mahershala Ali.
I cannot say the first name. I apologize. But anyway, who are both shown over the years in, well, Ali in television and in with Luke Cage, and he's, I think, in or about to be in True Detective season 3, and then all his movie roles and stuff. He was in Moonlight, wasn't he?
He was in Moonlight. He won an
He,
Oscar for Moonlight.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name or not. He was
Yeah.
in Moonlight. He was in, and that's last year. He was also in Hidden Figures, and then Viggo Mortensen, who obviously is known for Lord of the Rings and for many other things like The Road. He's done a lot of independent stuff and has shown time and time again that he is a fantastic actor. So the fact that this movie about this, I think, probably not very well known by, I think, most of the public, pianist, but the fact that it's gotten great actors in it and such high profile stuff, and it's being nominated for Best Picture and I think other things, I think is wonderful, and I think it's the best thing they have going for it. I think probably the worst thing I could say about it is that while it's a good movie, I enjoy it, I do have a problem with possibly some of the things that they got wrong or changed, whether it was intentionally or not. But besides that, I do think it was a good movie. I enjoyed it. I think it's a bit of a crowd pleaser in that sense. But I don't think, while it's a good movie, I don't think it's good enough to have been nominated for Best Picture. If I had just seen this movie, if I had not known that I was nominated for Best Picture, I would not have thought, oh, this is one of the best movies of the year. It needs to be nominated for Best Picture. I don't think it's at that level. Well, it's, again, certainly enjoyable. Nothing all that bad about it for the most part. It just is not up to the level of being one of the best films of the year. And I think really to have that, I mean, and obviously it's a subjective thing. Everybody probably has different, whether they think about them or not, has different ideas of what should qualify a film to be a best picture. I really think there needs to be some sort of a wow factor to this movie. And again, besides the fact that it's talking about somebody who's not very well known, I don't think there's a whole lot that's unique about it. It's very much, it's a lot of stuff we've seen before with kind of a racist character who kind of grows out of his racism to a certain degree, and then kind of also about a man who has to deal with racism and has had to deal with racism his whole life just because of the color of his skin, about a man who is trying to navigate the deep south while black. You know, it's not stuff that is terribly new, and I think that is dealt with really in a terribly new way. And I think really to be more deserving of the award, I think it really needed to approach that material in a way that was fresher than it is. As is, it's entertaining, but it's not saying anything terribly new, which I think is a bit of a shame.
Well, I want to preface by saying that I think Ali gives an excellent performance
Oh, he
as
does, yeah.
Dr. Don Shirley. I think that this performance is going to bring Dr. Don Shirley's music to the attention of a lot more people that have never heard of him, like you and myself. I'll admit it too. I felt like I had heard of him, but I had never heard him. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I'd never listened to his music, but I'm sure the name had come up, I don't know, on Jeopardy or something along those lines. I think that this film and it's because of the category that it falls into. I don't think it was made for this reason. I don't think it was the intention. The end product just feels like an Oscar bait film.
Yeah.
That if we were still only having to deal with 5 nominees for Best Picture, this film would be one of them this year, and we would be mad about it.
Yeah.
But it's part of 8, and so we're less mad about it.
People are still really mad about it, though.
But people are mad about it, and we can get into that if you'd like. But to be quite honest, I think it's an open and shut segment. One of the screenwriters on this film is the son of the real Tony Lip, Nick Vallelonga. And Nick Vallelonga put out a tweet that was dragged up at the time they were pulling up the stuff on Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart got out of hosting the Oscars, and then it was, what old tweets have people made that can damn them into obscurity? Well, Vallelonga made a tweet with regards to Muslims and 9/11 that was very offensive. It is my understanding that he had issued an apology for it years ago. It was also my understanding that it doesn't matter because we're going to have to deal with the controversy all over again. That tweet, that single tweet that was years old, better part of a decade old, if I recall, I believe it might have been in the it was before the presidential election. I'll at least go that far because it references President Trump. The controversy was thought at one point to derail this film from almost any awards. But then it won Golden Globes for writing, actually. So Vallelonga, who shares a writing credit with Peter Farrelly, the director, and Brian Hayes Curry, so Brian Hayes Curry, Nick Vallelonga, and Peter Farrelly all won a Golden Globe for writing this film. But it's a very personal story because it's about Vallelonga's father. And Vallelonga is a known screenwriter in Hollywood. This isn't a big deal. I don't want that to take up all my discussion, but I don't think we can talk about this film without mentioning this controversy that may or may not have an impact on whether or not it wins anything on Oscar Sunday. As far as the film itself goes, I enjoyed the performances. I felt like I was watching something a little, and I've used this phrase earlier in this podcast, paint by numbers. They took an amazing historical figure and they were able to craft a cinematic story that I have seen other films exactly like this
Mhm.
that felt like a Hollywood treatment, and then the Academy recognizes it come Oscar time. And it's also strategically released late in the year so that it really is an Oscar contender. If this film would have been released, I think, in April of last year or sometime, pre-blockbuster season or in the wake of blockbuster season, right before you go for the big Oscar contenders, it would have been forgotten.
Yeah.
I think Mortensen would have been recognized, and I think Ali would have been recognized, but I don't think the film would have got nearly the attention that it did from the
No.
Academy. I think that Farrelly has directed one of the finest films of his career, and yes, this is also the man who brought us, with his brother, Dumb and Dumber, There's Something About Mary, these goofball, wacky comedies of the 90s that are straight up like if you... Now, you're kind of giving me a goofy look here. Did you not know this about
No,
him?
no, no. I knew.
Okay.
I was trying. I'm looking something else to see if he
Okay.
directed
He,
some. Oh, he did do Shallow Hal. Okay.
did Shallow Hal. So, like, this is a change of pace for this director in a very big way. I think that he did handle this story with good intentions. I think he handled this story with good direction. I think it is a well-directed film. I don't want to knock him for being a bad director,
No, no, no.
because he's made films I enjoy. So, why not make a serious film that has a really good emotional pull to it, like this one does, and tell a sincere story and show a person going through what I would call a life-changing emotional growth. The thing about Tony Lip's racism, because like you said, he is a racist Italian bouncer who works probably for, he definitely has mob acquaintances and all these other things. His racism is depicted in a very passive way. And I'm not saying he doesn't say racist things, and I'm not saying he doesn't do racist things. He does a lot of them without doing them directly straight in front of the people that he's targeting. For example, when two black plumbers are assisting his wife, when he goes to insult them and call them a racist word, he says it in Italian to his Italian friends. He doesn't say it in English. He
No.
doesn't say anything to them in person. When they take a drink from his glassware in the kitchen, he quietly throws the glasses away. He doesn't make a scene about it. He doesn't say, "How could you offer them a drink?" And then his wife catches it and pulls them out of the garbage and washes them. So he has a very passive form of racism, which is just, he's a guy that grew up in a sheltered community and doesn't really understand other cultures, and his ignorance is really not his fault, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of a safe way of depicting racism. If you're,
Yeah.
and not saying racism's okay, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of it, but his growth is sort of an easy form of growth in terms of a narrative structure. I mean, once he spends time with the man that he's driving, he becomes friends with him.
Yeah.
It isn't the easiest of friendships, but then it develops, and they care about each other. And then by the end of the film, we're led to believe that they were lifelong best friends when really they might have just been okay acquaintances after, an employment situation. I don't know. We don't know the real truth there. But
Yeah, I will say Dr. Shirley's family has contradicted a bit of what the film says, that they weren't necessarily as close of friends as the film likes to depict. Whether that's true or not, I mean, I don't know. But there is some controversy there, which is, I think, one thing that people are getting a bit annoyed about. But anyway.
sure. And so I had questions. And when I have questions after watching a movie like this, despite the fact that, the performances drove me to feel all the things I was supposed to feel, really, I mean, there was a moment in this film where I thought Mortensen was doing a decent enough job. And then for some reason, there were a couple scenes in the third act that really just turned me on his performance to say this was one of the finest performances of the year. I was feeling it, man. I mean, up to that point, I felt like it was Ali carrying the movie and Mortensen just doing character work. And then all of a sudden, Mortensen brought that Mortensen look, that emotional connection he can have with the audience, and I was suckered in. That worked for me. However, in the end, this film felt like a okay movie. I don't know that I would have considered it Best Picture category worthy, and that's a problem because I can easily think of one other film that I would have put in its place, and it would be different than any other film in this entire run of movies, and that would be You Were Never Really Here, which, by the way, got no attention from the Academy and was heralded as one of the finest films of the year, including one of the best directed films of the year, directed by a woman. It was also one of the better written films, written by a woman, co-edited by a woman, one of the best acting performances of the year by Joaquin Phoenix. I mean, look, I'm not trying to say Green Book stole the thunder from another movie. Green Book was designed by the studio and the marketing element behind it to put it where it is right now in this discussion. And it did a good job of pulling, even despite controversy, for what it's worth. But this one, for me, I'm not saying it's a forgettable film because I liked the performances, but I do feel that this is a film where I don't think it has a chance in hell of winning this award.
Oh, no.
And I
I
don't think
better
you have to.
not win the award. I bet.
It won't. It won't. There's no way. There's too much with all the time left for the votes to come in, as I understand it, and there's too much controversy and political issues going on with this film. Its ship has sunk. Now, I'm not saying it's going to leave empty-handed. I'm just saying it's not going to win this award. There's
Yeah.
other films right now that are soaring in terms of popularity to win amongst the Academy to win that award. This one, I'm just kind of sitting here scratching my head as to the amount of attention that it's getting. Not saying it should have gone unrecognized, but I do think that it got a little more than it should have.
Yeah, this and Bohemian Rhapsody are getting, it is getting people angry about how much attention they are getting, which I understand. Going back to something you said, yeah, I think one of the greatest problems I had with this is, and maybe it is because and I think part of it is I think matured hopefully a little bit as a film goer and an audience person and as a person in general. And that I will say I was annoyed by the Hollywoodization of this movie, where it is a very Hollywood movie. And I think in that sense, one of the downsides I think of Hollywood movies, at least current Hollywood movies, is that when they're very Hollywood-like is that they can be a bit manipulative and stuff, and they may please crowds. And again, I was pleased. I enjoyed watching the movie, but I wonder if sometimes it was for the, if I should have been pleased, because again, I feel like it was being a bit manipulated with the source material and with what they were changing with it and stuff, and I wasn't happy about that. And I wish they had done it. What I think really would have benefited this movie is if they had made it more of an independent movie. Not that, I mean, I don't know how much of a budget this got, probably not a lot, but I mean, more of an independent movie, a really independent director, and I think really would have helped. I would prefer if this had been more about Dr. Shirley than it had been about Tony, because it feels like it's more a hey, isn't this great? A white person becoming less racist or something. Instead of being about, hey, this is about this really great African American classical jazz pianist who has been kind of forgotten for the most part, which I think it really should have been more about that instead of the Tony Lip character. Now, again, I'm not saying you can't make a movie about the relationship these two people had and about this tour and stuff like that. That can be interesting, sure, but I think it really should have been more about Dr. Shirley. I think that would have helped. And like you said, don't make I don't know how racist Tony Lip was. I don't know how much this tour helped him with maybe being less racist. I don't know. But if he really did make that much of a turnaround during this tour, and maybe through later years of knowing Dr. Shirley and however close of means that was, show it in the movie and show him transition, but make it a more difficult thing. Don't make it so easy and, easy to digest for people. Make it more difficult, maybe in some cases, for people to watch, because it probably was more difficult and uncomfortable in real life. So make it more true to life. Don't make it so just Hollywood and happy and, don't make it so much of a crowd pleaser, and
There,
I think that would have helped.
I think one of the big critiques as you're saying this, actually, it's kind of developed in my mind. I think the reason why I've got such an issue with this movie is that I think the screenplay's structure is so screenwriting 101 in a lot of ways, as in introduce two characters, bring these two characters together. Hey, we're making a road movie, like road movie screenwriting 101, and down to introduce a gun in the first act and fire it in the third. Like, that literally happens in this movie. In fact, it's more in the second act that they introduce it. In the third act, they fire it. But I think that's it, is that I didn't feel, aside from the performances, I didn't feel that I was getting anything new out of this movie.
No, there's nothing really unique out of it besides
No.
this. Besides the topic, and yes, and the acting in it, there's nothing. There's nothing to have to stand it out.
Right. And the point you made about I wish they would have shifted the focus of the story more on Dr. Don Shirley, I completely agree with you. I mean, here's the thing. Look at a movie like Hidden Figures, a movie Mahershala Ali was in, a movie you mentioned earlier. That was a movie that focused entirely on the African American characters in the film, and it was one of the best films I saw the year it came out. It was one of the most, but it was also a way that Hollywood, because that was a Disney picture, the way Hollywood can make a movie that we know is going to have some form of a happy ending, but make it genuine, make it interesting, make it engaging throughout. And this film, while it is engaging and it is interesting, I just didn't feel anything other than this is Oscar bait while I watched it. And aside from what I felt were two great performances, I didn't really take much else away from it. This movie didn't change the hearts and minds the way that I thought it would. And I think the reason why is because it chose to focus on Tony Lip as opposed to Dr. Don Shirley.
Yeah.
This genius whose goal was to go down south and try to change the hearts and minds of the racist Jim Crow South. But it didn't do it. And I think that there's a harsh reality that I think Dr. Don Shirley had to deal with, amongst other harsh realities he was dealing with, which the film touches on, but it doesn't
Hmm.
really commit. It commits to something else that, I hate to say it, I wish could have been a subplot to the film as opposed to the whole plot of the film.
Hmm. Yeah, it'd be like if to use Hidden Figures as an example, it'd be like in Hidden Figures if they just had focused on Kevin Costner and he had started the movie and is in the middle of the movie and he's the end of the movie, and these brilliant African American women, real life women, are just
Yep.
kind of almost side notes to his story and making him look all great and wonderful that he's accepting of these African American women in NASA, which
Yep.
as far as I know, I mean, he is in the movie, and as far as I know, that person was in real life. But the story is the African American women. The story in this movie, well, yes, part of it is this racist Italian, turning over a new leaf. It's more about this forgotten man who is very talented and is kind of ostracized by whites and African Americans and has a lot of pain for multiple reasons. That's the interesting thing. That's the thing you
Yeah.
should be seeing more of, not this redemption tale of this white man who we've seen 10,000 billion times. And uh,
I want to kind of use the same point I used with Bohemian Rhapsody, which was Bohemian Rhapsody, I felt was a missed opportunity.
yeah.
I think this film was also this. I shouldn't say this film, because this film is its own thing and it's always going to be its own thing. But I think the story was a missed opportunity. I think they chose the wrong angle,
Yeah.
and that's my opinion. That doesn't mean much, but in the end, we got a film that is more Oscar bait as opposed to and the potential to be one of the best films of the year, if not the best film of the year. And here's the thing, too. This is the wildest part. They had the right actor to play him.
Yeah.
They had Mahershala Ali, the guy, to play the part. And the thing is, I would love to see him take another statue. I don't know if he's going to, because I haven't really paid that much attention to his category yet. But at the same time, I'm sitting here thinking out loud to myself while I'm writing, notes about all these movies because we're getting ready to talk about them. And I'm just sitting here thinking, God, Green Book, an enjoyable film. I enjoyed it. I liked it. But what a missed opportunity, because they
Yeah.
just didn't focus on what I think is the bar none most interesting part of the whole story. And
Yeah.
it's all about the angle. It was the approach. The approach is just not what I think could have made it a real contender.
Hmm.
To quote Brando. But that's just
Yeah.
where I fall in the movie. I don't think it has a chance in hell of winning this award. I think it's a good enough film to be on a lot of maybe top 10 lists, maybe. But there was a lot of strategy in this film up to when they released it, who was cast in it. Like, there's just a lot of misfires, I think, that push it further and further down the ladder compared to its fellow nominees for me.
Yeah, I think the best thing I hope happens from this one is more people get introduced to Dr. Shirley's music and that he's given more status and stuff. But also, I mean, it's unlikely to happen, but it's happened in other cases too. I think I know one actor I think did it with Winston Churchill. But another hope would be that they do make more movies about Dr. Shirley from other points of view and other, hopefully from more of his point of view. And maybe, hopefully, Mahershala Ali can reprise the part in some of that. It's
Yeah.
happened before with other things. Again, I think I know at least one actor, I can't remember who it is, did a movie about Winston Churchill, then later, some years later, did another movie playing Winston Churchill. So hopefully that can happen with Mahershala Ali before he gets well, I think Dr. Shirley lived to be quite old, so he could have a lot of time to do this. Hopefully, he can reprise the part in some way and do it more justice to this character, because he is a great choice to do it. So it would be great to see him, maybe see a writer and director who could take more advantage of his skill and the story of this great musician.
Yeah, absolutely. And another example of that, not the Winston Churchill example, but also the Queen. Helen Mirren has played
Mm-hmm.
Queen Elizabeth twice, and Michael Sheen has played Tony Blair twice. So it can happen. I hope it happens. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, even if I have my gripes about Green Book, they had the guy. They
Yeah.
got him. And I'm glad they did that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that Mortensen is a fine actor.
Oh,
He
yeah.
really is.
He
And he
commits to
does.
everything he does.
And here's the thing, I would be willing to gamble that a lot of the reason this movie is so loved is so heavily placed on those actors. I think Mortensen brought much more to that character than the writing did. And I think that the same thing goes for Ali. Because again, I want to use the phrase missed opportunity for true greatness for this film as well. And that's 2 out of 8. that isn't bad. As
Mhm.
far as the Oscars go when they're picking their nominees, but this one I don't really have much else to say other than yeah, I enjoyed it, and yeah, I would recommend it for people. But if we have to put it under the lens of what Best Picture for the Academy is,
Mm.
I got questions, man, and I don't see this one taking home that statue. And our fifth nominee is Roma, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who audiences will remember the work Y tu mamá también, Children of Men, Gravity, and a lot of people will know Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Mm.
And I don't mean to say that in a negative way. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban turned that whole franchise in great directions.
It's my favorite
Um,
of those films, actually.
I think it is the best made film of all of those. So this is a film that stars first-time actress Yalitza Aparicio and Marina de Tavira. So Roma is the story of about 1 year, one calendar year in the life of a middle-class housemaid in 1970s Mexico, early 1970s Mexico. I think it actually straddles a new year, so like 1970, 1971. It is a very personal tale from Alfonso Cuarón, who actually lived in the house next door to the one they used in the film. And Roma refers to the neighborhood, whose Spanish name I can't quite recall, but Roma is the short version of the neighborhood that he grew up in. And it takes place primarily in that neighborhood and amongst that community that Cuarón was reared in. This is a beautifully shot black and white film. It uses extensive amounts of long takes, wide lenses, pans. They don't want the camera to be a distraction. They want the actors to act. But at the same time, every image is very carefully crafted. And the world that these characters inhabit, it feels, despite being in black and white, it feels very real. And Aparicio plays a character by the name of Chloe. She is the housemaid for a doctor's family. Chloe deals with life, love, trauma, loss, and family, all in this 1 year that the story takes place. I got to be honest with you, Tim. This film, I'm just going to come right out and say it. This film is my best picture of 2018. I will also openly admit I finished watching this 2 hours ago before we recorded this. I had intentionally waited to see it because I was hoping to get access to see it in a theater. Now, this was a film released by Netflix, so you could watch this anytime on any device you want to. Now, it is not recommended that you do that. It is recommended if you can, and trust me, there's a huge Twitter war going on about how best to see Roma. I watched it on a 65-inch beautiful television in my movie den, and I loved it. It definitely is a film that beauty is the one word I can use to describe it. I think that as a person who is a hobbyist photographer who adores black and white, Cuarón wrote, directed, co-edited, and produced a love letter to the life and the culture and the people and the family that is so dear to him. This is the most personal story, I think.
Yeah, it should be mentioned that I think he said, oh god, it was like 80 or 90% of the stuff that you see in the movie, he said that was based off of stuff that he was involved in or witnessed, and the main character is based off of, I think, a maid, or I think that worked for his family when he was a child, so.
Right. And this is about a young woman who is good at her job, well liked by her employers, loves the family's children like they are her own, but again, a young woman who wants to also have a life of her own. And there are pitfalls that come with that, such as betrayals. There's an unplanned pregnancy. There is trauma that unfolds with that. I don't want to spoil too much of the film, but there's trauma for the family, for
Certainly.
her, for everyone. And here's the thing. This young woman who has no acting training whatsoever stepped on camera and became probably, if not for Olivia Colman, my favorite, well, and Melissa McCarthy, but is easily in the top 3 performances by a lead actress I saw all year. And it all boils down to a couple of specific scenes, and I think that one of them is her in an operating room. There's a scene in an operating room that is a brutal long take. It's a brutal scene. It's a brutal scene to watch.
From a personal point of view, and I can't really go into why without ruining it, but yeah, that one got to me a lot.
And trust me, people who can now turn off this podcast when we're done, not now, but when we're done, and boot this film up and watch it in glorious high definition and enjoy it for what and this is a film that's in Spanish with subtitles. There's very sparse English. There's even a little Norwegian language in there somewhere.
It's not for people who are worried about watching a foreign language film, especially if they've watched little to none of them. There was not tons of dialogue in the movie. It's very easy to watch. It's very little. I mean, it's so easy just to forget you're watching a foreign language film. So
I would agree with that. And I think the choice to cast a literal Hollywood and all acting world unknown led to no chance of anybody having preconceived notions of where the film could go. And I think that there's a beauty in that. And that's not something we see a lot in this era of filmmaking. You know, usually when they cast a big name, we know that it's kind of like watching professional wrestling. The big talent is going to be protected in some way, shape, or form. I had no idea where this was going to go. I liked that. I felt like this was a fresh, unique story. I felt that the black and white cinematography is probably the finest cinematography of the year. I think it's got a good shot at winning that award.
Just to interrupt you for a second. I meant to look it up and I forgot. Did Alfonso Cuarón, did he say why he shot it in black and white?
I don't quite recall reading any quotes from him on that. I believe that part of it is because it is a period film. I think it's because of the films he grew up watching. I think if you want to put a director who's sort of reliving his early life and reconstructing it on the screen, it kind of harkens back and brings that nostalgia feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is not like your home movies, folks.
No,
This
no,
was
no.
shot on 8K. This was shot on the brand new RE Alexa systems. They built custom rigs for this film to shoot some of the sequences, specifically the dolly shots, the tracking shots. And these are incredibly well layered and complex sequences because they feel real.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like they took a camera, strapped it on a truck, and drove it down the road in a Mexican neighborhood where life is just, it's booming. Everything is going on at once. There's joy, there's tears, there's just everything you could think of. And it's very Cuarón in that if you've seen Children of Men, and a lot of people have, and more people should, there are some very good long takes in Children of Men that capture scale that make you sort of stand back and be in awe of how much is going on the screen. And yet it's not chaotic.
No.
It's very fluid, and it's very, you feel lucky that you just have to watch it happen as opposed to be caught in it. And that's specifically, there's an event, the Corpus Christi massacre was the event that takes place, and it happened during the year that the film took place, so it's in the film, and they depict parts of it in the film, and it's very violent and traumatic.
Yeah, there's a lot of political stuff that's happening kind of in the background of the movie. They don't really go too much into it, but it's kind of happening around the lives of these people.
Right. And I think that in the end, Cuarón didn't have to make this film for me to call him a master filmmaker.
Oh, no.
However, this, I think, is his truly most personal film.
No, and he said that, I think, even.
And I didn't even have to hear him say it. I just knew it from watching it. This is the film that I think, if things were going to go the right way on Oscar Sunday, and we were going to award Best Picture to the best film produced and made in 2018, Roma is the best picture that I saw. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from the other films that we're going to discuss. This is just my opinion. I loved this film. I unabashedly was like texting people as soon as it was over. I was like, look, it was hard for me not to pause it, pick up my phone, because, I'm at home and I can do that, and like start texting people. There are a couple of scenes that are going to turn people a little confused, and they're going to feel like it's a bit bizarre, but at the same time, it's all like, at no point did I feel this movie lost my complete and undivided attention.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, there's a couple of shots in this movie that I'm not likely to forget anytime soon. Actually, 3 shots in this movie that I'm not likely to forget anytime soon. And they're all long takes, shot with wide lenses that capture beautiful imagery. And the other thing is, man, if you can make a black and white movie and smoke the competition in terms of cinematography,
yeah,
you are one of the finest pictures of the year. And this movie is just that.
I will say, before I get into more of my thoughts on it, I think with the favorites, and probably after seeing it, maybe Black Klansman, I think it's probably, with those films, is one of the films that's most likely to win. And I thought it was probably the leading film to win, but I think it might not win for a very, very stupid reason, but a likely reason. And it happened with, not that I think, a few years ago when Amour was nominated, it didn't get as much, accolades of this. It didn't, I think, have as good of a chance, nearly as good of a chance to win as this one. But I think, like that one, the reason why Roma might not win is because it's also nominated for Best Foreign Film. And so they might be like, well, we'll give it to Best Foreign Film. And then they do that. And they'd be like, well, it doesn't also need to win Best Picture, so it'll just win Best Foreign Film. So I think if anything undoes it, it's nothing to do with the quality of the film. It's just because it's also nominated in that category. And while there's really no rule that it can't, and there's really no reason that it shouldn't, people might not vote for it for Best Picture because they don't think it should win both, which I think is a stupid thing. That should not be something that happens. But it's just like, it's like, again, Emma Stone, if her performance is good enough, she should be able to win another acting award 2 years in a row. I mean, that's just how it should be. If the performance or if the movie is good enough, it should win. It shouldn't matter, if it's winning in 2 film categories. It just shouldn't. But I think for that reason, there's a chance they won't win because of that. But I think while The Favorite, I think, is a more unique film than this, I think this is certainly the most auteur film out of all of these films. Like you said, it is, I think, and primarily, I think, because it is so personal. And unlike Green Book, it is so not Hollywood-like, really, at all, that I think that's one of the things that is so great about it. And he doesn't have cliches in this movie, which I think is wonderful. He makes it, like I think you said, true to life. He doesn't go with the easy thing. He goes for the emotional, he goes for the complex. At the same time, not doing much. The simplicity of it translates to the acting. The main actress, you mentioned she's a first-time actress. While she has some showy scenes in the movie, certainly, where she can really show, what acting chops she has, however inexperienced she may be, she mostly goes through the movie really playing it very, very minimal and not doing much with. She doesn't gesture a lot. She doesn't necessarily even move her face that much or do that much with her body. But despite that, she's able to show the audience all this complexity that is with her character and with her life and what she's going through and what she's living through. And I totally give her props for that. That is a very, very hard thing to do. Very, very difficult. And I don't think any other actor in any of the movies we're talking about has done something like that, where they are doing she's doing so little, but at the same time telling us so much. So I think
It's
that's
much
great.
akin. It's very similar to Gary Oldman's performance in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy,
Oh,
where he
yes.
was nominated for Best Actor, and I was actually pulling for him that year for that particular role. And I remember, getting into a very big discussion. I wouldn't say heated; it was just a big discussion. I was like, "Look, I'm sorry if best performance of the year that I saw, and I had seen every one of them that year in terms of the nominees. And I said, if the best performance that I saw amongst all of these nominees was actually one, I wouldn't even say it's pioneering a version of acting. It was just doing something that was so uniquely different from everything else,
Hmm.
which was in minimalism, there was gigantism. And it was
Yeah.
just, there was so much going on with his portrayal of Smiley that I was like, what? Like, this is such brilliant acting, and it's hard to describe for people, because here's the thing, and you watch a lot of movies, I watch a lot of movies, we talk about movies, you write about them, I get to talk about them on the radio. The thing that bugs me the most about general talk about film and theater and everything else when it comes to acting is that I think the barometer, collective societal barometer for what is good and bad acting, is busted. I don't think people really know how to judge good and bad acting unless they've done acting, or unless they've been coached on it, or unless they've just watched a very wide breadth of films and they get a sense of, sometimes you got to be huge and big like Gary Oldman in The Professional, and sometimes you got to be hyper minimalistic like Gary Oldman in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. The same actor can give you both ends of the spectrum. And then the more and more stuff you watch, you realize there really is no spectrum. There should be no preconceived understanding of what acting is or isn't. And in the case of Aparicio in this movie, you hit the nail on the head. There are scenes where the minimalist approach to what she's doing in the scene is actually deeply complex because she's a human being.
Yeah.
In the end, I want her to be a human being. I don't want her to be some big over-the-top character. I want her to be real. And I felt like a person of her character's station in the situations that she was in, I felt like she handled all of those beautifully and truthfully. And I really did feel like in that third act, there's a particular scene in a hospital where I was just like, I was really glued, man. And I was feeling it like I felt it the first time I watched Sophie's Choice and I watched The Choice take place. Like, it's that kind of good. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying the whole film is that, okay? I'm not trying to be like that's, but I would love to believe that she has a shot at taking home Best Actress in a huge upset as a first-time actor who may never act again. That's the other thing. She may never act again.
Yeah.
And yet her performance was so unique and beautiful and affecting.
Yeah.
And that's rare. And trust me, a guy like Cuarón is going to find that. Okay. And that's another thing. This is a beautifully directed film. This film has, for me, great Oscar energy. And rightfully so. I feel like it would earn every accolade bestowed upon it, and I feel like it would be cheated if it didn't win a couple of them.
Yeah.
And you're right about the foreign film and the Best Picture. I think that it has an opportunity to potentially win both. There is also another hurdle that we haven't really hit on yet. This, I believe, would be the first film distributed by a streaming service that would win those
Yeah.
awards.
Yeah, and the Academy is kind of snobby about that crap.
But here's the thing: the Academy needs to shut up and let it happen if it's going to
No,
happen, because it's Alfonso Cuarón, who is no slouch and doesn't
no.
make bad movies. And I think that there's an interesting dynamic there that I think will be a potential conversation piece. Whatever, all the other podcasts that are going to exist and talking moments. This film was unique this year, I think, not for
Mhm.
the same reasons The Favorite was, but here we just drag Green Book over the coals for being something that didn't feel fresh or new, but it was kind of the same type of story. This is a family story, but for
Yeah.
some reason I felt like this was very naturalistic, very fresh, real, true, interesting, heartbreaking, loving, all these feelings I had while I watched it. And I was like, you know what? That makes it the best picture of the year. That,
Yeah.
amongst other things, the cinematography, the
Yeah.
direction, the writing.
I do want to say before I forget, people going into it, this is not, just as a warning in case you don't like these types of movies, even though I still think you should give it a shot, is that this is not a plot-driven movie by any means. It's very much a character-driven movie. There really is not a strong plot to it. It's basically just what Blake described. It's a year in the life of this woman, so don't go in expecting a strong plot. There's not a strong plot. I mean, it's a good story, but it's not plot-driven at all. But
Yeah,
anyway,
and if you wanted to assign a plot, synopsis to it, like a very quick blurb on what the plot is her life.
yeah.
That's it. The plot of this movie is that you are getting to experience the life of a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes many forms. That takes time jumps. That takes, I don't know, a simple day of her life at work. It could be an important thing has happened and she has to go to the doctor. It could be she's going on a date. It could be all of these various things. Time with the family she works for, because they are her employer, but they're also like family to her.
Yeah.
And so there's a great deal of machinations going on in this film that, to say that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, it absolutely does. However, it is not a traditional action movie style thing, which has a very basic plot. And it is bad guy does a thing, good guy has to stop him.
No, no, it
It isn't like that. That's not the type of movie that it is.
no. The closest thing I can, and this wasn't nominated for Best Picture, but it was nominated for some awards. The thing I saw most recently that had this similar kind of thing, Mr. Turner a few years ago with Timothy Spall also had that similar thing.
Yes,
Where
it did.
there's no real plot to it. It's just basically following his life and all that stuff. So if you've seen that movie, it's similar-ish to that in terms of the way it tells its story.
That was directed by Mike Leigh, and he makes films like that. So yeah, I'd recommend Mr. Turner, but I
Oh,
would also give
yeah,
it that same vein
yeah,
of Roma, where it's like, don't try to expect the same basic.
no,
And I say basic because that's usually what it is. I mean, if you were writing a screenplay for an exercise, you should start with something that has a very basic plot, beginning, middle, end. But then once you realize that you're free to tell stories, this is more like an anthology of stories, of scenes that depict important moments in one year in the life of a young woman who is growing and maturing and finding herself. And by the way, I just want to point out one more thing. If anything is going to win this film Best Cinematography at the Oscars, it's the final sequence at the beach. And it's my understanding that they built a long pier. There's a long dolly shot with one focal length. It doesn't zoom. It just, the camera moves side to side, but it is one extremely long take. And they did that in one take. That was
oh
a
wow,
one take. Everything happened at once, and that was it. And that came from the Hollywood Reporters Directors Roundtable, where they got all these, like Spike Lee was there, Cuarón was there, Peter Farrelly was there. It was the guys that were going to be nominated for Best Director, basically, all sitting around, and they were some of the best directors of the year. And Spike Lee's one question to Cuarón was, how did you do the shot on the beach? And Cuarón said, oh, well, I had all these people, like all hands on deck, building a pier, and then we did it. And he goes, how many takes was it? And Cuarón said, it was just that. That was the one. We didn't do it twice. So they did all of this because of the time. They didn't have the time. The sun had to be in a very particular spot for it, and the window that they had to do it was the amount of time that they shot it in.
yeah,
And so if you follow how films get made, and trust me, the people who are voting for these damn movies, they do, because they do it. There is a uniqueness to this movie that I think is going to push it in the right direction come Oscar Sunday. It's going to win awards. I hope it wins Best Cinematography. I hope it wins Foreign Film. I hope it wins Best Picture. I hope that while Aparicio may not win Best Actress, I'm glad she was nominated, because what a performance.
yeah.
And I also have to say Cuarón, in my opinion, Best Director.
Yeah,
100%.
he won director for Gravity, I believe. That film did not win Best Picture. He is the last of the three three amigos, that being Alfonso Cuarón, Guillermo del Toro, and Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, to have a film not win Best Picture. So, because Del Toro won last year for Shape of Water, and Iñárritu won recently for Birdman, so that would kind of complete that group. And I think, and I'm saying this as a hardcore Del Toro fan, saying that, I think Cuarón is probably the most consistent director out of those three guys. I haven't seen all of his movies yet. I've seen most of them, but not all of them. All of them are good, if not great, and he just does not disappoint. And kind of
Yep.
like this movie, he is kind of minimalist, but I think just always delivers. And I think I mean, again, he won Best Director, so, I mean, he has been recognized, but be recognized more, I think, would be great. I will say, just to be honest, and just to make sure people don't misunderstand the way I felt about the movie. I understand why it will win. I understand it's touched a lot of people. I mean, Blake, you've raved about it. It really hit something with you. I think kind of like with Shape of Water last year, while there's tons of great things to recommend about it, and I will say, and I'm not saying this is as a negative to the film, this is just my subjective thing about it. For whatever reason, I know a friend of mine who also felt the same way. It didn't, I think, hit me in the same way it's hitting other people. So for me, it's not necessarily my favorite just because of that reason. I don't know why it didn't. There's certain moments of it that really touched me and emotionally and stuff, but I don't know if it's necessarily I didn't get the movie. It just didn't touch me in the emotional way that it is other people. But I totally recommend people go see it. It's just that's just my subjective thing. It's, for whatever reason, it didn't work for me as a whole as much as it did other people.
People, I think, who don't know what my preferred night out at the movies is, I love to be entertained, but sometimes I love to, have that fine 6-course, whatever, however many course meals one would have in a fine restaurant with a nice wine or whatever. This is that kind of movie. I don't watch movies like this every day, and I don't rave about them to people as openly as I would this particular film. This film is special, and I'm glad and I expect the Academy to act accordingly when it comes to this film. This film will not leave Oscar Sunday empty-handed
No.
in any way. Yeah, this one's special. It's easy to watch because you can watch it if you have access to Netflix. And at the same time, I would encourage people to go see it on a big screen. If I get a chance to do so, I know I will. And heck, I've already seen it. This one was special. So just remember that.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our next film, A Star is Born. This is actually the fourth, kind of the fifth adaptation of this story. To give a brief history lesson, because I like to do that sort of thing. In 1932, there was a RKO film called What Price Hollywood that starred Constance Bennett and I'm not gonna pronounce his first name correctly, but Lowell Sherman. That was directed by George Cukor. Then in 1937, David O. Selznick produced a film called A Star is Born that starred Janet Gaynor and Frederick March. That was directed by William Wellman. He wanted Cukor to do it, but the stories were so similar that Cukor turned him down. RKO was going to sue Selznick for plagiarism. They eventually decided not to do that. Now, because the plots of those movies are so similar, while the 1937 version has never officially been called a remake of What Price Hollywood, people usually count What Price Hollywood as a version of that story. Now, after that, Cukor did direct a version of A Star is Born in 1954 with Judy Garland and James Mason, which I believe is probably the best known version of this story. Then finally, in 1976, a man named Franklin Pierce directed a version of it with Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson. And this production of it that came out in 2018 has had a bit of a history behind it. Originally, Clint Eastwood was going to do it, and he was going to star Beyonce in the starring role. Eventually, Bradley Cooper did come on as an actor, playing, I'm assuming, the part he is playing right in the film as we have it right now. Then Clint Eastwood dropped out of the film for whatever reason. Bradley Cooper took on directing, still with Beyonce doing it. Then eventually, I don't know if Beyonce just couldn't do it or no, it was because I think they had delayed it because of pregnancy, though that might have been during the Clint Eastwood time. Anyway, eventually Beyonce, she dropped out of the film, and Bradley Cooper saw Lady Gaga performing at a event or something, and he actually met her in a similar way that his character in the movie meets her character, and he decided she would be the best person to do it, and so we have her. So this story has a long history. Bradley Cooper said this is his first time directing. He said that he was not intending to make a remake of this, but he didn't want to play a musician in something, and the property just kind of fit what he wanted to do. So, and this version of it, I'll admit I was not able. I wanted to watch all the other versions before I watched this one. I was not able to do it before our recording, and so I am, besides who was in the other versions, I'm totally oblivious to the stories of those. This one, though, is about a young woman named Allie who is working in a job that she does not like. She does have talent for songwriting and singing, and during some nights, not every night, she goes to a drag club and they allow her to sing some covers of songs there, though she never sings her own songs because she's too nervous about it. Well, one night, a singer, I guess, would you call him a country singer, I guess?
Yeah, country western rock.
Yeah,
I would say
yeah.
he's kind of a he transcends both, or he bounces back and forth between
Yeah.
the two.
That musician named Jack, played by Bradley Cooper, after a concert, he stumbles into the bar this drag joint, just looking for a drink, and he sees Allie singing, really likes her, starts talking to her. They have a night out, and eventually they form a relationship. Well, first off, he invites her to a concert. He gets her to sing one of her songs. She blows up, and all these opportunities open up for her, and this new fame and recognition is being showered on her. Jack and Allie are dealing with forming a relationship and the troubles of that. There are problems that arise because of partially from worry from Jack about the fame maybe changing Allie. There may be a bit of jealousy going on there about her rising fame maybe overshadowing him, even though they started out doing duets together and doing his concerts. And then there's also the problems of Jack has he has an ear problem that he's had since he was a kid. He's not dealing with it properly. The concerts aren't helping. He's also a serious alcoholic. He's also doing some drugs. And the movie is really about dealing with the fame, Jack dealing with his drug and alcohol addiction, and the kind of rocky relationship between Allie and Jack. So I was interested in this movie. I tend to be interested in movies that have tons of different versions of them, and like I said at the top of this, there have been many different versions of this story, not one in a while. And oddly enough, the first A Star Is Born was also nominated for Best Picture, so none of the other ones were. But anyway, so I was interested in this. I thought it was interesting for Bradley Cooper to take on its first-time director. I thought Lady Gaga was a very good choice to do this. She's very, very talented in ways that I think people, for a while, weren't recognizing. And I think over the past few years, she's started to get more recognition that she deserves for being the very talented singer that she is. So I thought she was a great choice for this. I'm glad that Clint Eastwood didn't do it. I don't really know how well he would have handled this. I mean, I don't like to put limitations on people, but I don't really think of him as a kind of a musical person. Not that, I mean, he's had music in his films and stuff, but as a musical, I don't really think this really would have been suited for him. I guess, I mean, the first thing would just be, say, as a first-time director, Bradley Cooper does a good job. I think it's not the best first time out as a director. I've seen better things. I think there's a lot of potential for him. Unlike some other directors, there's not a clear style yet. At least I don't see one. So I would like to see him grow more with that. One directing thing I did notice, which I don't know if there's reasons for this, but I noticed there's a lot of close-ups in the movie. There's not a lot of like wide shots or wider shots. Even during the concert scenes, they usually are focusing on his character or Lady Gaga's character. So that was the only kind of style thing that I noticed. But in terms of the movie itself, I think he did a pretty good job with it. Again, I can't really compare this with the other versions of it because again, I haven't seen them, so I don't know how I would rank this compared to the other ones. I mean, obviously Lady Gaga has, I mean, the past two versions of this have starred Barbara Streisand and Judy Garland, two of the most famous movie sceners of all time. So she had a lot of competition, but no, I thought he did a good job with the story. I thought it was a bit long in the tooth in certain senses. It felt a bit long and stuff. But one thing I liked about his performance and something he added to the story was, despite the fact that his character is kind of this, he almost in a way seems a bit old-fashioned. I would think, coming from a farming background a little bit and also singing kind of country western rock music, he seems like he would probably be a bit conservative. But the character himself, there's one scene a ways into the movie where Jack has this really emotional moment with Allie where he starts to cry, which I really like because it was a vulnerable moment that I don't see a lot of actors giving themselves. They don't let themselves do that, and it was a really human moment, and I would say that for a lot of the movie. But there's certainly a Hollywood movie. I think Bradley Cooper, for the most part, he avoids a lot of Hollywood cliches that a lot of other people would have put in the movie, that they would have put in a romance story, that they would have put in a story like this. He avoids a lot of them, which I liked. He just made it kind of a very real thing about about what might happen. I mean, and the only thing that I think is maybe a bit fantastical is that Allie maybe rises to fame a bit too quickly and gets a bit too much recognition a bit too easily. But beyond that, I think it's just a very real movie that I think he did a good job with. But what do you think about it, Blake?
Well, this was one of my favorite movies I saw all year. I think part of that is because it was directed, acted, and co-written by the same person. And in one of the interviews I watched where he talked about this film, he did discuss how difficult it was to get financing at a certain point. Because like, as you had previously mentioned, Beyonce was attached at one point, Clint Eastwood. This was going to be a very different movie. The only thing that would have maybe been the same was Bradley Cooper in the Jack role, or I should say the male protagonist role. However, I think what he was able to do in sort of taking complete hold over this movie and also producing it, I think he was able to create characters that I thought were deeply layered. I didn't have to have every, minute detail given to me through the script or through scenes or flashbacks. I got everything I needed as we got to know these characters. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be quite refreshing because, again, I did know this was a remake. I was very aware of the Judy Garland and James Mason version, mm-hmm. but also the Barbra Streisand, Chris Christopherson version. And I was looking for something hopefully a little fresh, something that had a neat look. I would give Cooper high marks for accomplishing that.
Well, it's certainly very modern.
And that's why. I felt like the cinematography, which was the cinematographer's first name always escapes me, but his last name is Labatique, and previously he won an Oscar for Black Swan. And oddly enough, the day this movie I was able to see it, the same weekend he shot Matthew Labatique.
Yeah, saw it.
He also shot Venom, which came out the same weekend.
I remember hearing that.
And as far as the movie, photography goes, both movies are shot very well. This man knows what he's doing. The thing that I really appreciated was that the concerts were shot with more focus on the artists, not so much the fans, the big arena, the big, and part of that was because they didn't have the money to film and those types of things. They didn't have the visual effects budget to like digitally fill an arena. The other thing though, and I think I would put a lot of thought behind the idea that Cooper has, in the last few years stepped onto the stage and he's been doing live theater. One of the things about live theater production is you don't always get a camera up close. So if you're sitting up in the balcony, sometimes it's hard to see what's going on. I think his intention was, I want this to be an intimate feeling of all of these sequences. And by the way, for the character of Allie, it seems like the way she communicates best is through her music. As you get to know her better, once she becomes more confident in her voice, and not her singing voice, because she knows she can sing. She knows she can sing like crazy. It's the fact that she's going to sing her words. There's a couple of scenes in this movie that I have to admit, they broke my heart. And part of it was watching Sam Elliott, who is nominated for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, who plays Bradley Cooper's, it's a long story, but his Bradley Cooper's dad, Bradley Cooper's dad in the movie had two kids, but very far apart, so that's why they're so much different in age. But yeah, they're brothers.
Correct. Yeah, and Sam Elliott is the much older brother who's also his tour manager and is trying to look out for his younger brother, who clearly has
problems.
But also all of the problems. And the scene work that they had together, I thought was very special. In fact, I remember walking out of that movie and I kind of counted on both fingers. I was like just naming off categories that I thought this movie would be nominated in. And aside from getting a Best Director nomination for Bradley Cooper, I was right. I mean, I like every one of the ones I named, and I'm instant messaging them to people because a couple friends I know love the Oscars, and I said, this is a movie that's going to get nominated for the following. That was pretty spot on, and part of it was I was just hopeful that Sam Elliott would get recognized for this.
It was first time a nomination, I think.
First time nomination, yes. And he's put in good performances before, but I think he really brought it in this particular film. Now, Lady Gaga, she's no stranger to, my Spotify playlists. She's not the type of person that audiences went into this movie being completely unaware of. This is a person who's incredibly famous before we saw her in this. And she has a pretty solid acting resume, even stepping into this movie. So for some people, this was maybe the first time they saw her as an actress.
I think it was for me.
But she's done television and done well with it. She's been featured in films and done fine with that. But this is her first true, we're building an entire narrative around her.
But she makes it look really easy. She doesn't look like she's struggling with it at all.
And I think if you follow her ascension in the music business, a lot of it is very personal, and it plays into
Hmm.
the script. For example, I remember following an interview, reading an interview that she had done years ago, where she talked about how like it was recommended that I get plastic surgery on my face and get a nose job, and it was recommended that, and I was never going to do that. I will never do that, and that is brought up in this. It's very, I wouldn't say it's even throwaway, but it's something she brings up when she first meets Jackson. That whole line, it became a big meme on the internet, and it's a scene that was in every one of the trailers, which was where he said, hey, turn around, I want to get another look at you. The way these two played off of each other, if they gave an award for best on-screen chemistry, I don't know that I would put any duo this last year ahead of them.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed watching them act together.
they're a good fit, and not in a. I've seen other parts where I think earlier in the podcast I mentioned It Happened One Night with Clark Gable and Claudia Colbert, which
Yeah.
I still think is probably the best on-screen chemistry for a romantic comedy. Now, that is more. I mean, they have great chemistry together in that movie, but that is more of a. Not that they're being big, but that's more of an in-your-face, great chemistry. This is a more of a really subtle chemistry between
Yeah.
the two. That I mean, it's not. They have really great chemistry, but it's not showy. Like I didn't realize how good of a chemistry they had until you just mentioned it, and then I thought, oh yeah, they
Mhm.
really did have great chemistry. They just weren't terribly. They didn't get in your face about it. So
At no point was the chemistry showy. I would agree with you on that word. It wasn't showy. The moment in the movie that it clicked for me, how much I was enjoying watching them, was the first time they had a fight. Like when they, because as a couple, their
yeah.
characters are a couple, and he's very drunk and he says some very disparaging things. She calls him out on it. The way that they handled that, I was kind of blown away, because it didn't feel like I was watching two people speak lines from a
Well,
script.
apparently one of those, at least one of those insults was an ad lib that he, or at least something he did not tell Lady Gaga that he was going to say, and
Right.
that's part of that reaction is her actually getting pissed off at him. So I think that's
Right.
maybe
And
why it seems so fresh.
And I think that speaks to the point of chemistry. It's just, there was a fluidity to how they were going to handle all the scenes. And again, I think there's a benefit to having your leading actor also be your director here. And if you think about it, Bradley Cooper, if you look back at his career over the last, well, let's just say 10 years, look at all the directors he's worked with. Look at the types of styles that he has worked with as an actor. I mean, Clint Eastwood does not direct the same way David O. Russell does. Those are two examples.
Oh.
And him finding his own style and making I wouldn't call it a safe film, because I mean clearly he had a hand in every facet of this movie, not just as an on-screen personality or in the director's chair. He also co-wrote it, he also produced it, and
which
as
is a
personal.
which is I'm saying
Oh.
which I'm just saying which is a lot to do. I
Mhm.
mean, just to act in a movie and to also direct it. That's I mean, it's really daunting and really exhausting, especially for a first-time director to do that, to have the lead male part in the movie and to direct it, let alone producing it and co-writing it
Right.
and have all these different hats on. That's a lot to do. I mean, I might have some criticisms about his directing style, but the fact that he handled all this so well and turned out such a polished product,
Yeah.
despite that, is saying something.
And I mean, Gaga's, all the attention that she's getting for this film, specifically for the song Shallow, which she sings with Bradley Cooper, and also her acting accolade, the recognition she's getting for her acting, I think it's all warranted. This is one of those films that I don't think has the steam going into Oscar Sunday that it did right after its initial
No.
theatrical release. But I do think it is one of the better films that came out in 2018. It is one of the first films that I recommend people see from 2018, because I see this movie playing into a lot of different tastes for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one, Lady Gaga; two, Bradley Cooper; three, it's a really great drama as far as, beginning, middle, end, characters with problems who have to, work together to solve some of them. Some of them don't get solved. Some of them have tragic ends. You know what I mean? Like, it takes
Mm-hmm.
you places. This is a movie that, for me, in the end, it was probably one of the most intimate movies I've seen in a long time, where director, actor, and producer and writer were in love with the project. And in this case, it happened to be the same person, being Bradley Cooper. But also, everything he got out of his selected co-star, which was Gaga, that he had to
Mm-hmm.
fight to get to get the approval for her to be in, and he had to prove that she could do everything that they said she was going to do. I find this movie to be one of the more enjoyable films that I saw in this
Mm-hmm.
category. And I've been thinking about it a lot. That's the
Mm-hmm.
other thing. The performances, specifically the Jackson character. I feel like there have been other performances in the male side of acting this year that people are going to jump right to, like maybe Christian Bale in Vice, or there's other portrayals that people have jumped towards. I keep coming back to this one
Well,
because I keep thinking about it.
yeah, I mean, this year we have nominated. We have Bradley Cooper. We have Rami Malek for Bohemian Rhapsody. Christian Bale for Vice. William Dafoe for Eternity's Gate, where he's playing
Vincent Van Gogh,
Vincent Van Gogh, and
Van
Viggo
Gogh.
Mortensen. Yeah, and Viggo Mortensen for Green Book. All of those. I mean, I haven't seen William Dafoe in Eternity's Gate, even though I really want to because I love him and I think it's interesting for him to play Van Gogh. But I've seen all the other performances, and I think all the other ones, at least Malek, Mortensen, Bale, especially Bale, and not necessarily that they're doing anything. Those actors are doing anything wrong. They're doing fine jobs in the parts that have been written for them. But they're all kind of traditional. Not necessarily that they were going for Oscar bait with them, but they're traditional parts that you could see being nominated for Best Actor. Bradley Cooper
Yep.
is just playing a really good part and doing a really good job with it. It's not an best actor part. Not that he's not doing necessarily acting that's worthy of that, but it's not. He wasn't gearing it towards, hey, I want to get nominated for best actor. He was just co-writing, directing, and acting
Right.
a good part. So I think that's maybe what helps makes it stand out from the other ones and maybe makes it more memorable.
The other thing is, it's the only character that is fiction. Every one of the other characters is a real
Oh, that's a
person.
good point. Yeah, even
They're
Defoe.
all
Yeah.
portraying somebody who has a wealth of material of research and academia backing up that research to tell you what this person was like, or in some cases, film clips, footage. For all I know, Nick Vallelonga had home video footage of his dad and of course, Tony Lip was an actor. He was in multiple Scorsese films. Like, that guy the guy that Viggo Mortensen plays went on to be a Hollywood actor. Bradley Cooper's character is, to me, unique in this category, strictly because it's the only one that it's entirely created by Bradley Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it doesn't have, base material, for example, the James Mason character or the other two versions. Plus, you have Chris Christopherson's rendition, and his character has a little more foundation based around Christopherson's
Well,
interpretation
they're
of this
more
character.
just I haven't seen that version, but knowing Chris Christopherson and
Yeah,
seeing Bradley Cooper's part, they are similar-ish in terms of
they are.
look and in terms of
Yeah,
attitude and probably points of view on life and
right.
stuff.
I wouldn't say that Cooper held on to any of that. I think what he was given was sort of if he treated it, if anyway, I would ask him, if I could ask him this question, I'd say, the character of Jackson has so many layers and he has a complete arc. That's the other thing. He has a complete arc. Rami Malek's Freddie Mercury, as far as the way they wrote that story, that's kind of a forced complete arc because they manipulate the timeline, they change things up, and then they just end the movie after the the biggest concert they ever played, despite the fact Queen toured for years up until Freddie got really sick. The Tony.
Behind the scenes, just for people who didn't know, privately, Blake and I have had a bigger discussion about Bohemian Rhapsody. Blake's not
Yes,
terribly fond his
it's.
elements of it.
I am fond of Malik's work in the film. I am not fond of the way that the story was really handled. And then as far as the Christian Bale thing goes with Dick Cheney, which we'll get to, I'm sure we'll talk more in depth here soon. That's a character, a person. If you say you're playing Dick Cheney, I have a wealth of interview clips and speeches that I could go to, to draw inspiration from and how to handle his mannerisms and everything. Everything Cooper did was organic.
Yeah.
He didn't really have any kind of baseline. He had nothing to go by other than if there was someone in the music industry that he saw as inspiration,
Yeah.
he created from that. And so for me, it stands out more so as a portrayal, as a film, because Cooper really stepped into the role of auteur on his first time out.
Yeah.
And that's kind of rare.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, and he doesn't. Well, I mean, one, he does add some nice mannerisms to the character. His accent and voice. He has a bit of a kind of mumbled voice, but he has that. He has his bad hearing, so he's constantly asking people to repeat themselves and stuff, and he's very consistent with that. So his character again has some real life mannerisms that help add to the reality of the character. He's very consistent with it, but also they don't take the easy way out with a lot of these problems. There are time cuts, so you're not necessarily seeing like every moment that Jack is struggling with his alcoholism and stuff, and maybe they cut to a point where he's dealt with all of those problems, but then some of those problems are still there. So it isn't just happy Hollywood easy fix thing. So,
Exactly.
so which I think is good.
And just for the sake of humor, I would say that any movie that has Greg Grunberg in it should be nominated for Best Picture. And Greg Grunberg plays Bradley Cooper's character's driver at the beginning of the movie. Greg Grunberg is an actor. He's a longtime friend of director J.J. Abrams. He's been on a lot of television shows. He's in one of the Star Wars films.
Was he? Oh, he might have. I wonder if he met him because they both did. Maybe both did that show with Jennifer Garner.
Alias,
because
yeah.
J.J. Abrams did that.
They're old friends back from the Alias days.
Yeah, and also 2 comedians are in it, which you may not expect. They have Dave Chappelle and the guy whose bit was insulting.
Andrew Dice Clay.
Who I didn't even recognize. I think I had heard he was in the movie. I forgot all about it, and then my wife pointed it out that he was in it. And I was like, oh, because he plays Lady Gaga's father in the movie.
Yeah, Allie's dad.
Yeah, and he's totally, for people who don't like or hate Andrew Dice Clay, he's nothing like, well, let's say maybe not nothing, but he doesn't do the Andrew Dice Clay shtick in this. He's a totally different character. He's very supportive, maybe sometimes overly supportive of his daughter and stuff. So he's actually gives a very nice performance in the movie. I liked him.
He is one of the hidden gems of the movie that gets overshadowed by, the Sam Elliott, Bradley Cooper, Lady Gaga, Dave Chappelle's. Andrew Dice Clay, the actor, not the stand-up comic, has a pretty good track record in movies and television when he appears. Especially, if you ever saw Entourage and love or hate the show, Andrew Dice Clay plays himself on Entourage, and it's a send-up version of who he is, and he's excellent. He is downright funny at playing this, trumped up version of himself.
So he's self-aware, basically.
He's very self-aware. And then also he gave an actually similar performance, not in terms of character, but in terms of caliber, in the film Blue Jasmine opposite Cate Blanchett and Sally Hawkins.
Oh, I think I heard he was in it, yeah.
He's a fine actor, but you have to utilize him well. And I think Cooper could not have found a better actor to play this part. He was very loving. He was very supportive. He had a very family outlook to it. In fact, family extended even out to his friends. That was an interesting thing I liked about his character, was that,
he's Italian.
He was so well-meaning. Yeah, very Italian and very well-meaning in that great way. So, there was a genuine, I think, element to his performance that, not a lot of people are talking about. But when you cast a film and you're able to pull in actors to take on these parts that, in the end, when you look at the whole run of, who stepped on screen, said something, and then, moved on, everything about this movie for me clicked and worked. As far as pacing goes, that's a fair criticism, I think. I don't think it was perfect on the pacing side of things. There were a couple moments that I felt the movie slowed down its momentum, but I think it more than makes up for it. When you get to the musical numbers, when you get to the intimate scenes between Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga, the movie makes up for its shortcomings. And I think I liked that about this movie a lot. In fact, I've only seen it once.
Me too.
But it is one of the films that I've thought about the most since the nominations were dropped. And I hope that it has a fair showing at Oscar Sunday. There's a scene for Sam Elliott that, man,
the one near the end.
Yeah, when he's back in the truck out of the driveway.
That's the one. That one again. I don't want to give too much away about it, but it's a moment of vulnerability because Sam Elliott is known for primarily for his westerns and stuff. He's known as being kind of very man's man, tough
guy
and stuff. And he's certainly that in this movie. It's still a very Sam Elliott part, but he has a moment of vulnerability that again I like seeing. I like actors who aren't afraid to be vulnerable, and he's not afraid to be vulnerable. And again, it's not showy. It's a very reserved thing, but it hits you a lot, and it's very, it got to me, it got to my wife because I was watching it with her, and it's just a small little thing. They don't spend tons of time on it, but it's very effective. And his character doesn't get tons of screen time, but he does leave an impression on you.
But as the category best supporting actor or actress is defined, I think he is like a quintessential example of it. And I don't know if the Academy's going to see it that way. I don't think they will, but I hope they do. And I just want to focus on top to bottom. The cast in this film was outstanding. I think everybody hit all the right beats, and including Dave Chappelle. We mentioned he's in it, but we didn't say much about him. He also brings a lot of brevity, I think, to certain scenes that need it. They could have gone way off the rails, and you don't even know his whole story, but you know enough. And that speaks, I think, volumes to how well put together this movie was.
Yeah.
Even secondary characters that step in for 2 scenes. It's wonderful. It's a good start to finish movie.
Yeah. His character is a perfectly well-rounded character, even though he's I think only in like one scene or sequence in the movie, and then I don't think he's ever shown before that or mentioned or shown after that or mentioned even.
Yep.
But it's a good performance.
This was a musical because I would classify it as such. That kind of snuck up on me, knowing that it was going to be made, knowing that it was going to come out and everything. But I think this is one that delivered. I think this was one that definitely put one of our best, we as a society, one of the best musical talents at the forefront. And I remember, and she kind of got to do a little art imitates life in it, and got to be very personal with how the material was handled. And it shows in her performance. Same thing with Cooper. I'm really pulling for recognition on Bradley Cooper at Oscar Sunday, because for some reason I think, well, there are a lot of reasons really, and I've covered a few of them, but this film was special for him in a lot of ways. And it was kind of a turning point where he went from being, if you think about it, he was Hollywood hunk to now he's good-looking man who is also an excellent actor. Oh, and by the way, he can direct and he can write and he can he's kind of the total package modern Hollywood icon.
No, he's very talented, and I think maybe with this film, well, and obviously stuff like American Sniper and some of the stuff he's done with David O. Russell, I think people maybe finally maybe start to see him as more than just the guy in the Hangover movies, which,
right.
Well,
I don't want him to stop making those movies.
No,
I
think he's
do
good.
Those too.
No, he's very good in that, but he has more talent than that. He's very, if you see him in any interviews, he's a very intelligent guy who cares about his craft and cares about movies and stuff, and he's a very, I think, not emotional in the sense that he's gonna like burst out crying or something randomly, but he's very in touch with, I think, emotion and I think really human stories, which you see in this movie. So I think if hopefully he continues directing, that we'll see maybe more stories like that. I don't know, maybe he'll do other things that are a bit more lighthearted, but I think really that's going to be his thing, is really movies with really strong character work in them, which I'm excited about seeing. So,
and I agree with you there. I think that I don't want to say he has like a niche, because he should do what his passions drive him toward. I think he's earned that as far as a performer and everything. Clearly the way he's handled this film specifically opens that to me, that door. I would definitely put this movie high on my list in terms of quality films that came out in 2018. I don't know how the Academy is going to see it. I don't think it's going to win Best Picture.
No, like you said, it's lost a lot of momentum, and it has been doing well at the other award circuit stuff too. So
correct.
It's lost a lot of its. I think, stuff like we mentioned, Favorites and Roma and maybe Black Klansman to a certain extent, or maybe just going to overshadow them. One, because Roma has so much stuff going for it, has so much hype. Same for The Favorite and Black Klansman, just because it is touching on something that is very relevant to our time period. Where this movie, I mean, it says a little bit about, again, fame and stuff now and stuff, but it's a movie that really could play at any time. It's not specifically relevant to now, and it doesn't have the hype around it. So I think, deserving or not, it's going to kind of maybe fall through the cracks of it. I hope it wins some stuff. Probably, I mean, I would love something for Sam Elliott, though maybe that's partially just because I love Sam Elliott, and it'd be nice for him to be recognized for, especially, I mean, he's, I think, 64, 60, no, maybe he's older than that now. Anyway, he's been in the business for a very long time, so it would be nice for him to get that recognition.
I agree with you. I think we could just keep talking about this movie because I really enjoyed it, and I haven't really talked to anybody about it. I think I did a quick review of this film on WGN Radio Chicago, but I found this movie to be one of the few movies that I had hyped before it came out, and I felt that it really delivered, and then some, after I watched it. So that doesn't mean much as far as Oscar, voting goes, but I think that we might have a couple of surprises. I think this movie will definitely leave Oscar Sunday with something. I don't know what that is, but I think it'll be something. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, though, because you're right about the other award circuit. It hasn't been lighting up everything. So I think, though, that the Academy would be very off this year if they didn't recognize this film in some way, outside of nominations, I should say. All right, and then the final film in the Best Picture category for the 2019 Oscars is Vice, directed by Adam McKay. It stars Christian Bale, Amy Adams, Steve Carell, Sam Rockwell, and a host of other actors that will be very familiar to audiences, but they're making a lot of cameo appearances. They're not really playing characters at the forefront. So it's just too many to name at this point, but that's what it's like for Adam McKay these days. And speaking of that, following the success of The Big Short, Adam McKay is re-teaming with his star Christian Bale, and they've set their sights on one of America's most known and I almost wanted to say hated, but I'll say divisive political figures. Christian Bale and Amy Adams are shining in their portrayals of political power couple Dick and Lynn Cheney. That's former Vice President Dick Cheney. Now, this film thrives on its satire at the base, but then there's also some true sincerity built into the performances of these characters. You can tell that the director's not a big fan of Dick Cheney. I would say that the director openly admits in a title card at the beginning of the movie that they pretty much are not a big fan of this guy, but they're going to do their best in telling his story. Speaking of what this covers, because it is the Dick Cheney story, it really covers the period where Dick was young, rough, and a pretty rough and tumble guy. He actually got a job working as a lineman after he kind of dropped out of Yale, which he squandered his time at. And then it goes all the way up until his tenure as vice president is over and Barack Obama is inaugurated. And then it has a bit of a wrap-up period at the end, but it all sticks to sort of this timeline that is completed as far as the real narrative arc once Barack Obama was elected president. Another big thing is Sam Rockwell is playing George W. Bush in this movie. That was one of my favorite performances in the movie because we're all very familiar with George W. Bush in that he was our president, in that he has a very special way of talking, that he is certainly a character. However, a lot of other portrayals of George W. Bush have been pretty showy. Specifically, I would go with Josh Brolin's performance in Oliver Stone's W, obviously Will Ferrell's performance on Saturday Night Live, and these are just two takes on George W. Bush that popular culture would recognize very easily. But I think that they were bigger than, the man himself.
But those are a bit more, well, one, Will Ferrell's doing a skits for SNL,
Right.
so they're going to be that. And plus, I think Josh Brolin, I mean, the movie was about George W. Bush, that
It
one
was.
specifically, so it's going to be maybe a bit more showy just because he's in the movie more. But yeah, I see what you mean. I think he's shown to be less of a maybe a little bit less of a fool, a little bit less comic to a certain degree in Vice than in W, where he is shown to be a bit bigger than life, which I think is partially because it's about him, partially about because it's when it came out. It came out at the end of his presidency, and
Correct.
also it's maybe a director's choice or whatever. But
Certainly. Rockwell, to me, in this film, was very down to earth with his portrayal of George W. Bush. For better or worse, that kind of thing. It felt like it was very sincere. You can see his charms, you can see his faults. He doesn't try to hide his faults. He just is. And I liked that dynamic that he brought to the film.
Yeah, I because he's not a person you would think. I wouldn't have thought, oh, cast Sam Rockwell. I mean, I love Sam Rockwell, but I wouldn't expect to cast him as George W. Bush. But yeah, and I think you're right, because I mean, say whatever you want about George W. Bush. He is, I think, self-aware of what he is. So I think, yeah, Sam Rockwell does bring that to the part, which I think is nice.
It is very nice. And then there's also Steve Carell's bringing his comedic talents, of course, but also some decent dramatic chops as former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who was instrumental in cementing Dick Cheney in Washington, D.C., as we find out in this film. For me, the big high marks on this movie were the editing, the script, the performances. Those were the big things. Now, the direction is very good. McKay is a good director. I don't know that I would put his directing in this particular instance over top of a couple of other directors out there this year, but I got to be real with you. I like when this guy makes a movie. I like his approach to it. I didn't feel like I was watching a movie about one of the most hated political figures in U.S. history, being a movie just filled with scorn and hate. He was trying to play certain things down the middle and be like, look, Dick Cheney is a human being, and here's where he's made mistakes, as opposed to Dick Cheney is this living supervillain, which he had been portrayed as in the media on multiple occasions.
But at the same time, basically the entire cast, none of them are really shown to be good people, though.
Correct.
And there's really, if there's any sort of moral character in the movie, it's the narrator, which it's too complicated to explain who the narrator is, but that's probably the only, if there is any moral character, it's probably that one. But yeah, it's pretty much a movie of just kind of, from McKay's point of view, bad people doing immoral, unethical things. And it is done, I've seen just a little bit of Big Short, but I think it's done in a similar same style kind of as that, right? In terms of
It
how they're doing it.
is. The Big Short has, because The Big Short's topic was full of very complex things that the general public is not fully aware of. People who want to be aware of it are aware of it, but the film did a very good job of like breaking down complex problems, complex things that the people who are watching this movie were likely victims of the short itself and the housing bubble and popping and everything. The way he handles it in this movie, he does a little bit less of it, but he does do it, and it is
It's
effective
yeah,
in
it's a
in
bit of a
setting up the dynamic of specifically when exactly what you're talking about is like the sequence where Cheney is now vice president and they're setting up all of the key positions. Who's going to fit what position? How is it going to ensure that we have power in this government? Because again, Cheney is a man who wants power. So how he went about doing it, who he put where he put them, etc. The way they explained that visually gave a very simple but effective explanation of
yeah.
what the cabinet looked like, what all of the senior official positions looked like, and why he was able to accomplish what he was able to accomplish. Because he took the vice presidency in directions it had never gone before. And they highlight that in one of the trailers for the film, where Dick Cheney is sitting opposite George Bush when Bush wants him to become his vice presidential candidate. And he says, well, I run a large company, I do this. The vice president's job is more of a symbolic thing. He goes, I would like to make it more proactive and handle this, 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 and this. And all of these things, key elements that would have taken him from being simply the vice president of the United States to being able to profit off of a lot of it. Not just him, but others.
But yeah,
And
and yeah, he's shown kind of just to be kind of take advantage of Bush's not inexperience. He had political experience before that, but maybe some of Bush's overtrusting natures, maybe some of his naivete and
his
stuff.
overtrusting nature, his
And
lack of interest in
yeah,
certain subjects.
and to kind of puppeteer him and to basically be president without being president in some cases. But
Correct. And the other thing is he was also and they focus on this, the unitary executive theory, which is a big legal theory that has led to a lot of discrepancies, arguments, etc. They handle that well. It's a complex idea. I mean, it's a simple idea when you just say what it is, but when you start diving into how is it legal, is it not legal, the vice presidency falls in a very interesting position. And the film, I thought, captured some of that quite well. But in the end, this is a biopic of sorts. It's an editorialized biopic is the easiest way to say it.
it's not a biopic in the same way that W is. That W is very much a film. This is kind of a hybrid, like kind of like I said, satire, drama, almost pseudo documentary
Correct. Yeah,
type
I agree.
thing. It's very different in style as something like W or Green Book or Bohemian Rhapsody or something.
Right. And they had plenty to go on. I mean, there's congressional record in some cases because, it covers his entire political career. And he was a member of the House of Representatives. He was chief of staff to, I believe it was Gerald Ford briefly. And he worked in the Nixon White House.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this was a guy who had a multi-decade political career. And they tried to make him human. They did. And Bale's performance really reflects that. It is one of the finer performances of the year. I thought there were so many layers to it. There were whole scenes where Cheney doesn't say a word, but you're glued to what Bale's doing because you can see what he's thinking. And that speaks to how good of an actor he is, which is no surprise if you've ever seen a movie with Christian Bale.
Mm-hmm.
But even one of the lesser movies he's ever made, he's very good in it.
Yeah.
He doesn't phone it in, man. He just doesn't do it. I also want to give a big push to Amy Adams, who is one of my favorite actresses to watch on television. Her portrayal of Lynn Cheney is my favorite in the entire film. I mean, I love Sam Rockwell as Bush, and I really enjoyed Bale, but Amy Adams is I think she's just the best of her generation as far as actresses go. I really do. She is fantastic. And this was a great part for her to sink her teeth into. So I was high on this movie. I wouldn't say it's going to win Best Picture,
No.
but it was definitely one of my favorites that I saw this year. They did a good job of picking movies I loved for this category, honestly.
Yeah, and it is a bit topical. Not as topical as Black Klansman, but very quickly into the movie, though, I think they kind of justified why they were making it in terms of we have a very interesting but mysterious political figure. Let's try to explain him. And I think it was a story that had not really been told. They had told stories about people, I think, around him. I mean, again, primarily George Bush, but they hadn't really delved into him very much. And stuff that he did and and stuff he was trying to do is very interesting. And if you're American, it has affected you whether you realize it or not. So, and whether it's for good or ill, he did make an impact on the country. And I think it's good that Adam McKay pointed that out. So I think I'm glad that they made it. You mentioned that you really like the editing in the movie. Now, I've seen a lot of people criticize the editing in the movie and say that along with Bohemian Rhapsody, they really didn't like the editing. Now, one, I will say this has certainly better editing than Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
But I didn't really mind it. I can see why people maybe wouldn't like the editing in the movie, but I think it works because the problem with Bohemian Rhapsody, the bad editing in that was editing without, it was doing stuff without purpose, where this one had very clear reasons why it was being edited the way
Right.
it did. So I partially understand why people wouldn't like the editing, but I also at the same time don't agree with it. I think the editing works for it.
I would argue that for me, it is not my preferred style of seeing a movie edited, but it's kind of the way Adam McKay does things. And I like that there's something different than what I always prefer.
Yeah.
For example, I looked at Bohemian Rhapsody and I didn't like how it was edited. I just didn't like it. I didn't think it was that good. I thought it was over edited. I thought there was too much, and it wasn't even so much in the concert scenes because I really enjoyed those. It was in a lot of the dialogue based scenes where music wasn't even a part of it. And not to go back to Bohemian Rhapsody because I kind of covered that already, but this particular movie, I absolutely agree with people if they say they didn't like it and understand. I wouldn't say agree, but
Yeah.
I can understand why they don't. I liked it because I felt like if you're going to make a movie about a guy who spends a lot of his time in an office and on a phone, and you make it sort of kinetic in the way the story unfolds and you jump back and forth, I didn't have a problem following the nonlinear storytelling of this film.
No, me either.
Now, I can see people having a problem with it and not liking it. I thought it was tied up decently. I thought it was done pretty well. And I thought the editing for how complex the script is in terms of jumping around between time periods,
There's a lot going on.
there's so much happening. And again, it's fast. This movie, for being a movie that's about 2 hours and change, like I thought it moved quickly.
No,
I
you,
enjoyed it.
you, yeah, you get to the end of his career, it's like, oh, we're done. But at the same time, they covered all the major things because they didn't
Right.
leave. They were covering a lot of stuff in a short span of time, so they weren't really spending a lot of time dilly dallying. They really just kind of got to the point and did the stuff
Right.
that you needed and didn't do the stuff that you didn't need. So
And I felt that was reflected in the editing, which is why I gave it a
yeah,
high mark.
yeah, I wouldn't.
But again, I can see why people are
Yeah,
annoyed or don't love it. But sometimes the thing that is really good is not the thing you expect or prefer.
yeah,
It can be something different that you didn't expect. And
yeah.
and I thought that was the case with this particular film.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't know how much I like the style. Not this isn't really the editing, but the style of it. Again, the kind of mixture of a straight film and then satire and then documentary type stuff. I don't know if I'm a huge fan of that because I think it does break the fourth wall a lot, and sometimes it did maybe take me out of the movie. It was out of all the movies we've talked about, it's the one that I was the most aware of being in the theater watching a film
Uh-huh.
because they were kind of taking you out of it so much. I did kind of get back into it when they would do normal scenes and stuff, and
Sure.
I would get back into the characters. But yeah, I don't know how much I like that style of it. I certainly want to watch too many films with it because one, I think it's kind of exhausting for one. But again, I think it's a worthwhile film. Yeah, I don't think it's going to win because it's very, I think, for being the film it is, it's very much under the radar, but to a certain extent. But there's a lot to recommend it. I think people should go see it. If nothing else, I think it's a nice little, just if you want to be aware of the impact Cheney had, I think it's worthwhile to see. So
We have a very interesting, now that we've kind of covered all of the nominees, it's for me, Black Panther, Black Klansman, and Vice, I file under cool films. As in,
they're hip.
they're hip, but I've also seen them jump out at audiences that are very wide in terms of spectrum. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
Roma, I can't easily recommend Roma to anybody, but I
No.
did on Facebook the other day. I was like, I think this movie's outstanding and everybody should watch it. A Star is Born, it reaches a lot of different people, but at the same time, there's some cutoffs for it. Vice is the type of movie that because it's about the person it's about, I think can reach almost any age group. And
Well, it's
plus
been
it's done by Adam McKay,
yeah, because
who
it's done in, like you said, kind of a, again, for lack of a better word, I think a hip way, and it's so young people might get into it, but also younger people are getting more into politics, so
correct.
it kind of hits it, they all get into it partially because of that too.
And the other thing I want to bring up, before I cut off about Vice, is the final monologue that closes out the film, where Christian Bale is playing Dick Cheney. It's just Dick Cheney, and he's sitting down to do an interview, but then he turns off the interview and he addresses the camera. He breaks the fourth wall. He obliterates it, honestly. That monologue is some of the best acting and writing I saw all year, period. And I know that going into Oscar Sunday, we're looking at probably a Rami Malek taking home the Oscar for Freddie Mercury. But if I wanted to plead a case, the monologue Christian Bale delivers at the end of this movie is my case. It was
Hmm.
so good that I was like, man, even if I was sort of just lukewarm on this movie, he won me over at the end. And the
Hmm.
thing is, he won me over by playing a person that I have a lot of issues with,
Yeah.
as an American citizen. But there's a point being made there, and it's kind of just just great the way that it was handled.
Yeah.
So this movie is good. This movie
Yeah.
needs to be viewed. This movie needs to be debated.
Yeah.
I think, and I would argue that despite the fact that the character Bale is playing is, to some, he's been made a target. The man has been made a target for this film, to be a punching bag in a way. I don't think they handled it that way. I think they made him human. And
Hmm.
I think they also made him in that final monologue. I think they kind of got him, not
Hmm.
in a get him like, ha, we got him. I mean, like, I think they got him as in they understood him.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
I have read zero comments from Dick Cheney, the man, about the film, if he's even made any. But it was effective
Hmm.
filmmaking.
Yes.
That's all I'm going to say.
So I think we can wrap up. Usually in these things, we do kind of a list of ranking of all of these for various reasons, partially time. We're not going to do that this time. Maybe we'll bring it back next year. But before we close out, I guess I would ask you two questions, Blake. What film do you think is going to win Best Picture, and which one do you want to win Best Picture?
Always a tough one. What do I think will win Best Picture? I think that the Academy, dealing with some of the controversies that they've been dealing with, certain films have more momentum than others. I would say that I would like to believe my answer will be to both questions, and it's Roma. Given the nominees that we have here. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was my favorite, but I think Roma is the film that should win because for a lot of reasons. One, I thought it was a masterclass in directing and writing and producing and putting together a movie. Two, it has nothing really to lose because it's not even made in the Hollywood system. Three, it also comes from a platform, or has been mass distributed by a streaming service. And I think the Academy is sort of opening up its boundaries
Mm-hmm.
a little bit this year with some of the nominees. So Roma, I think, fits that mold, that principal mold that I see. I also would like to see it win. Now,
Mm-hmm.
granted, the cheat answer is I would like to see Black Klansman, Roma, or The Favorite win,
Mm-hmm.
and I would be fine with any one of those three. I
Um,
really would just be happy if Bohemian Rhapsody didn't
didn't
win.
yes, it's kind of the I think for both of us, it's probably 10 years ago, I think it was, for 2009, for the
Yeah.
2008 films. I was hoping that anything, I didn't care what it was, anything would beat Avatar. Because I just did not want to see that film. I didn't care what beat it. I just didn't want it to be that
Yeah.
film. I think it's a similar thing. I don't care. I think any of the films, while I would still be annoyed to a certain extent that they won, I would prefer over Bohemian Rhapsody. Yeah, and to answer my own question that I posed to Blake, I would say this is a very difficult year for me to judge. In the past two podcasts we've done, it was easier for me to kind of maybe get a good guess of stuff that I could answer both questions more easily. This year it's been very, very, very difficult, and I really don't know what they're going to do. I would say, similar thing to Blake, I think it's probably going to be rather Roma, The Favorite, or Black Klansman. Which one of those, I really don't know. I really, really, really don't. I think probably The Favorite or Black Klansman over Roma. Again, just for the foreign language film problem that we mentioned earlier for
We did,
Roma.
yeah.
But which one do I think is going to win? Yeah, Favorite or Black Klansman, which I'm cheating with my answer. But which one do I want to win? That is also very, very hard for me to answer. Again, it's between those two films. I would probably say, even though Black Klansman is more, in a way, I like that one more, and in a way, and it is certainly more topical. In a way, I would almost maybe say Favorite because it's sticking with me a lot, and it's just such a unique film that I would kind of like it to win, even though in a way I enjoyed Black Klansman more. But I think that about wraps us up for this podcast today. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are about any of the films, what you think might win. If you disagree or agree with anything we said, please let me know in the comments. I like hearing similar and dissimilar opinions than mine. I like conversation, so please don't be afraid to spark any conversation. And I guess that about wraps us up. We'll again do this next year, but until next time, I will catch you guys later. Hope you guys all enjoyed that. Please join the discussion below. I'd love to hear your opinions. If you liked this episode, please hit the little like button, and if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. A link to my film blog, where you can find text and movie reviews, along with all my video and audio material, can be found in the description below. You can also find me on Twitter at CinemaPackRat, while I babble on about film and give updates on the status of videos and blog posts. In the meantime, please check out some of my video reviews or other podcast episodes, like the one in the annotations.